Chapter 2874, 2874 Might of the Ninth Grade Seals. Chapter 2874, 2874 Might of the Ninth Grade Seals. 2874 Might of the Ninth Grade Seals. Ling Han was completely puzzled. Who the hell would know who this person was? However, he didn't show this on his face, and he replied, of course. He planned to fish more information from this person. Oh, then tell me what you know, Meng Dong said, not falling for Ling Han's trick. He smiled as he looked at Ling Han. Fuck. This person is fairly alert. Ling Han shook his head and said, how can I tell you such a big secret just like that? What if you're trying to trick me? He continued to bluff. Ha ha ha. Meng Dong roared with laughter before nodding and saying, this is indeed a big secret, one so big that it can even upheave the heavens. However, little brother, it looks like you still haven't awakened yet. How strange. You're already at the second tier, so why haven't you awakened yet? He wore a puzzled expression as he stroked his chin. Ling Han shook his head, saying, since you're not willing to say, and since I'm extremely keen to know your secrets, I have no option but to capture you and make you speak. Meng Dong shook his head, saying, little brother, you're still a little too weak to capture me. Oh. Then why don't I give it a try? With a roar, Ling Han tossed aside the gigantic vein of ore that he had been holding before charging at Meng Dong. Boom. 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 The two of them immediately started to attack each other, not holding back in the least. They both wanted to crush the other in the most dominant manner. However, even though Ling Han's cultivation had improved, Meng Dong's cultivation had improved as well. He had already reached the third tier. He was at the early stage of the third tier, and his power was already approaching the late stage and even peak stage of the fourth tier. However, it was unable to reach the fifth tier. This was because he wasn't freakish enough, so he was unable to surpass two entire major tiers. Moreover, the jump from the fourth tier to the fifth tier was far too large. Boom. The two of them continued to clash, with neither of them being able to gain the upper hand. Little brother, your older brother isn't going to go easy on you this time, Meng Dong said with a loud laugh. A large dragon rose from his back, yet looking closely, this wasn't genuinely a large dragon. Instead, it was a seal. After taking shape, it returned to Meng Dong's body. Wang. The symbol lit up, causing his power to instantly rise by an explosive amount. 39 times, to be exact. How impressive! Ling Han exclaimed in his mind. Apart from Meng Dong, he had never come across anyone else who could use a 6th grade seal. Meng Dong clearly wasn't supported by anyone at the 6th tier or 7th tier, so where had he obtained such a high-level seal from? Perhaps he had concealed his background. Or perhaps he was like Ling Han. When he ascended, perhaps heavenly venerable seals would automatically appear. Forget about it, let me finish this fight first. Ling Han roared as he fought, activating the 4 direction seals and also increasing his power 39-fold. The seal would materialize with each punch that he threw and charge furiously at Meng Dong. Meng Dong was fearless, and he brutally shattered the seal that was rushing at him with a single punch. He was truly no inferior to Ling Han. He was far too powerful. They both channeled their heavenly venerate techniques, with Ling Han unleashing his fists of fury and Meng Dong starting to spit out weapons again. This technique was already ferocious to begin with, and the repulsive spitting action caused Ling Han to become incandescent with rage. His fists became wild and brutal as he channeled his fists of fury to the extreme. Their battle was intense, yet they were still unable to determine a victor. Little brother, eat this strike. Meng Dong bellowed. His bones started to glow, forming a fuzzy seal that radiated with a petrifying aura that could suppress the heavens. Meng Dong's power rose explosively at this instant, increasing at least 60-fold. Ling Han faced this strike head-on. Peng. He was sent flying back. Little brother, this is a 1st grade seal, Meng Dong said calmly. His body was glowing with unlimited radiance, and an air of chaos was pulsating in his exhalations. He was like a paramount deity as he walked toward Ling Han. The Empress and Hu Niu also heard this, and they couldn't help but feel stunned. Even though Ling Han had unearthed so many heavenly venerable seals, The most impressive of them had only been a 6th grade seal that had multiplied his power over 30 times. Where had Meng Dong obtained this 1st grade seal from? Little brother, obediently surrender yourself. When your older brother awakens your slumbering memories, I might even consider gifting you this seal, Meng Dong said with a chuckle. If he were being honest, then he would truly be the most generous person in the entire world. This was a 1st grade heavenly venerable seal. Even 7th tier heavenly venerates would covet it, right? Meng Dong would give it away just like that. Linghan regained his balance, saying, if I need it, I'll take it myself. Little brother, I've discovered that you really like talking big, Meng Dong said with a shake of his head. Against your older brother, how many exchanges do you think you can withstand? He charged over with vigor, with his battle prowess magnified over 80-fold thanks to the blessing of the 1st grade seal. This was simply astonishing, with a single strike capable of severely wounding Linghan. Linghan smiled faintly. With a single thought, countless seals instantly lit up on his body. What a surprise! You actually mastered this many seals? Meng Dong exclaimed with astonishment. However, what does that matter? It's merely quantity with no quality. No matter the quantity, it's still nothing but a waste. He charged over again, yearning to suppress Linghan. Linghan remained silent as he replied with a punch. Peng! A stunned expression instantly washed over Meng Dong's face as he was involuntarily sent flying back. He became quicker and quicker, eventually crashing into an extremely distant mountain with a thunderous impact, blasting it into oblivion. This was a combination seal formed from 111 9th grade sealsit could increase his power by 222 times. Whoosh! Meng Dong shot out from the rubble, his entire right arm gone. This was the price he paid for facing Linghan's attack head-on. With Linghan's power 100 times greater than his, this result was naturally inevitable. He wore a stunned expression, disbelief in his eyes. He was actually this fragile and helpless. Combination seal, he spat through gritted teeth. That's right, Linghan replied. However, he didn't waste any time, immediately charging over again. 9th grade seals. Meng Dong muttered, the veins in his face bulging out. 9th grade seal had always been a synonym for trash. Just like with the gulf between the 1st heaven and the 9th heaven, there was no comparison between 1st grade seals and 9th grade seals. After forming a combination seal, however, things would be completely different. At that time, 9th grade seals could turn the tables and rival 1st grade seals. Peng! 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 Linghan started to pummel Meng Dong. Their battle prowess was no longer on the same level. Meng Dong was like a ragdoll at this moment, sent flying left and right with no strength to resist. He was already unable to spit out any more weapons. Instead, he was violently spitting out blood. Little brother, you truly can't be underestimated, he remarked with emotion. He spat bucketloads of blood with each word, and his entire body was full of broken bones, made starkly clear by his caving flesh. He unleashed a roar, saying, I have no other choice, I can only call for a helper. His voice was thunderous, and pushed out with his mighty power, it was able to travel into the distance at an astonishing speed. He still has a helper. Linghan frowned upon hearing this. However, his attacks became even more rapid. Since his opponent had a helper, it was naturally important for him to finish this battle even quicker. Otherwise, once his power ran out, it would be difficult to say who would end up dead. Yet, Meng Dong's helper arrived even sooner than Linghan anticipated. In just a few seconds, a figure had already flown over from the distance. It was a slender and attractive figure. She was a beautiful woman with a blossom-like appearance and a graceful and seductive demeanor. Meng Dong, you're actually unable to defeat our little brother, the woman said with a silvery laugh. Her impressive breasts bounced as she spoke, a truly provoking sight for the eyes. Chapter 2875, 2875 Forced to Retreat. Chapter 2875, 2875 Forced to Retreat. 2875 Forced to Retreat. Lucia, aren't you going to hurry up and help me? Meng Dong yelled. His situation was far too miserable at this moment. Not only had he lost an arm, but there was even a gaping hole in his chest. In fact, this hole was almost in the position of his heart. However, there was nothing he could do about this. Right now, Ling Han's battle prowess was truly at the epitome of the 4th tier. Without a battle prowess at the 5th tier, it would simply be impossible to suppress him. Only at this moment did Lu Xie's expression become serious. She didn't say another word, instead charging over in a free and elegant manner as if she were walking on clouds. Boom! She unleashed a palm strike that carried with it a devastating might, causing everyone to suddenly realize that she was also terrifyingly powerful. She was also at the early stage of the 3rd tier, yet her battle prowess had already soared to the peak stage of the 4th tier. She was no weaker than Meng Dong. Meng Dong naturally wouldn't leave Lu Xie to battle Ling Han alone, so he immediately charged forward to help her. With the two elites combining their power, the might of their attacks went up by another notch. Scram! Ling Han roared. He unleashed a furious punch, backed by his explosive power that had increased over 200-fold. He displayed his invincible might. Peng! Peng! Lu Xie and Meng Dong were both sent flying. Meng Dong, this little brother is far too ferocious, no? Lu Xie said as she spat blood. Can't you see? Can't you see that he's mastered over 100 combination seals? Meng Dong humphed in reply. I thought he was trying to scare people with all these seals, Lu Xie said. These two people were truly able to maintain their calm and composure. They were clearly at a disadvantage, yet they still continued to chat and poke fun at each other. It was as if they didn't know the meaning of fear. Ling Han roared as he continued to press his advantage. Lu Xie and Meng Dong exerted all their strength, yet they were still unable to rival Ling Han. They were sent flying left and right. However, they knew that as long as they could withstand this period of attacks from Ling Han, his battle prowess would definitely start to decline. The problem was, if they insisted on continuing to struggle like this, there was genuinely a possibility that they might be killed by Ling Han. Right now, the gulf in battle prowess between them was far too great. Let's retreat, Meng Dong said with an exasperated shake of his head. I've been waiting for you to say this, Lu Xie said. She was extremely resolute as she immediately turned around to flee. Meanwhile, Meng Dong fled in the opposite direction. That way, Ling Han could only pursue one of them. Ling Han didn't hesitate for a single second as he shot off after Meng Dong. However, just as he moved, he heard Lu Xie's voice travel over. Little brother, have you forgotten about your two beloved wives? Ling Han immediately stopped in his tracks when he heard this. If Lu Xie came charging back while he pursued Meng Dong, would the Empress and Hu Niu be able to defend against her? That was clearly impossible. Perhaps the Empress could rival her after advancing to the 3rd tier. Now, however, it was simply impossible for her to do so. Meanwhile, Hu Niu's ability to challenge those above her cultivation level was a big fat zero. Thus, there was naturally no way he could rely on her. Meng Dong's voice also traveled over. Ha ha ha, little brother, I hope you're awakened the next time we meet. If you're not, we'll bring even more friends to help you. Ling Han humphed in reply. He had only failed to capture Meng Dong because his battle prowess was still too weak to comprehensively suppress him. However, once he advanced to the 3rd tier, it would be a completely different story. At that time, he would suppress whoever dared to challenge him, however many of them there were. The Empress and Hu Niu walked over, both of them extremely astonished. Prodigies like Meng Dong should have been extremely rare. He was only slightly weaker than Lin Yolian and the others, or perhaps even at the same level as them. However, not only had someone like Lu Xie appeared, judging by his words, there were even more prodigies like him. Moreover, Ling Han was most likely one of them as well. It was just that he hadn't awakened yet. Just where had these two people come from? Don't worry about them. As long as we improve our own cultivation, we won't need to be afraid of anyone, Ling Han said, strengthening his resolve. Nothing would obstruct him from climbing to the peak of the cultivation world. The Empress and Hu Niu both nodded in agreement. They also possessed fearless determination and belief. The three of them continued to search for veins of ore. If they didn't hurry, the others wouldn't leave anything valuable for them. If they obtained heavenly venerable seals, they would naturally refine them straight away. Meanwhile, if they obtained great herbs, they would divide and use them evenly among themselves. However, great herbs were relatively easy to find, while heavenly venerable seals were extremely difficult to unearth. After hundreds of millions of years, they only managed to obtain a meager 36. Ling Han received 21 of them, and this allowed him to master a total of 139 heavenly venerable seals. Compared to the target of almost 1,000, this could only be considered the very beginning. Comparing the other heavenly venerates to him, though, most of them had only mastered the 7 generic seals. Anyhow, they managed to obtain quite some great herbs, and this allowed the Empress and Hunyo to advance to the peak stage of the 2nd tier and the 3rd tier, respectively. However, because it was far too difficult to break through the barrier and ascend to the next major tier, neither of them took another step forward. Ling Han started to catch up to them, reaching the peak stage of the 2nd tier at an extremely slow speed. The Empress and Hunyo were unable to ascend because their cultivation talent wasn't genuinely top-notch. It was because the Empress had fused together with the power of 100 dimensions while advancing to the 1st tier that she had gained the momentum to reach the 2nd tier without much resistance. However, with this momentum exhausted, it would be extremely difficult for her to ascend to the 3rd tier. As for Hunyo, she didn't have many desires or wishes. However, this allowed her mind to become empty and pure, thereby making it easier for her to interact with the fundamental particles. It was because of this that her cultivation was ahead of the Empress. However, the more fundamental particles inside one's body, the more they would repel other particles. Thus, attempting to ascend wouldn't be an easy matter. This dimension was already cleaned up fairly well. Ling Han asked around a bit and found Ju Heng and the others right now. Those from the outside dimensions had mostly arrived here already. Thus, Ju Heng and the others had naturally set up a base here as well. Ling Han, Yu Borong has exited seclusion, and is currently looking for you. Be careful, Lin Xiaoyang immediately warned when he saw Ling Han. Yu Borong was Yu Chengwang's father, and he was a 6th tier heavenly venerate. Ling Han had killed Yu Chengwang, so it wasn't surprising that Yu Borong wanted to hunt him down and kill him. It was merely unexpected that he had left it till so late. He was cultivating in seclusion before, so his strength has most likely gone up another notch, Ju Heng said. How strong? Ling Han asked in curiosity. Chu Hao chuckled, and replied, probably no weaker than senior brother Ju. Ju Heng rolled his eyes in reply, saying, your strength is similar to mine, so him being no weaker than me also means that he's no weaker than you. That being the case, why reply in such a roundabout manner? Lin Xiaoyang shook his head, and said, both of you started later yet have pulled ahead. Meanwhile, only my strength is stagnant and not improving a single bit. I've already been left behind by you two. Chu Hao and Ju Heng both consoled their senior brother. In fact, being able to reach the 6th tier already proved that he was a prodigy for the ages. After all, the number of 7th tier heavenly venerates could be counted on 2 hands. Ling Han asked the 3 6th tier elites about why the 2 realms had overlapped. I don't know, Ju Heng immediately replied with a shake of his head. The 3 of us have discussed all kinds of possibilities. However, reality has proved that none of our speculations are correct. What about that ancient corpse? Ling Han asked. This was also a big mystery. A 7th tier elite had actually died. This was far too unfathomable. That person was indeed a 7th tier heavenly venerate, Lin Xiaoyang said. My father and the other 7th tier heavenly venerates found some time to investigate the corpse, and they think that this heavenly venerate died due to an extremely powerful impact. Ling Han was astonished. Shouldn't 7th tier heavenly venerates be indestructible and undying? Who can kill 7th tier elites? Was he killed by several other 7th tier elites? Ju Heng shook his head. This impact was far more powerful than what 7th tier heavenly venerates can unleash. To say nothing of a few 7th tier heavenly venerates, even a team of 100 7th tier heavenly venerates will be unable to unleash such a powerful strike. Ling Han found this even more mysterious. Even 100 7th tier heavenly venerates would be unable to do this, so perhaps a group of several hundred 7th tier heavenly venerates had attacked in unison? However, if there had truly been so many 7th tier heavenly at that time, then why had they all disappeared now? Chapter 2876, 2876 Calling Reinforcements. Chapter 2876, 2876 Calling Reinforcements. 2876 Calling Reinforcements. And this saber as well. Zhu Heng retrieved a broken saber and handed it to Ling Han. Sure enough, the ability of 7th tier elites is extraordinary. Even with the three of us working together, it still took a huge amount of work to refine the murderous aura within it and make it gather together. If it's activated, it will now unleash a murderous aura in a set direction. If you unleash it by surprise, even 5th tier elites will be slightly affected. However, only slightly. Lin Xiaoyang added, in fact, this is mainly because this saber is broken, causing it to lose its previous might. Otherwise, even us three wouldn't be able to suppress it. Complete 7th tier precious tools would contain the willpower of 7th tier heavenly venerates, so it was only natural that they could suppress the heavens. Now, however, this saber was already broken, and the heavenly venerate willpower inside it had already vanished. It was because of this that the 6th tier heavenly venerates were able to refine it. Ling Han accepted the saber. Thank you, seniors. He also retrieved some items that were wrapped in stone, and handed them to Zhu Heng and the others. These were the heavenly venerable seals that he had obtained. He, Hu Niu, and the Empress had already mastered them, so he was now giving them away as a friendly gesture. Just how valuable was this broken saber? Even Xin Qihu had especially had someone stay here to search for it. However, Zhu Heng and the others had returned it to him after spending a huge amount of effort to refine it. In comparison, the three of them were far nobler in manner. Zhu Heng and the others laughed heartily as they accepted the heavenly venerable seals. They used the complete heavens ring to observe these heavenly venerable seals first, only keeping them if they didn't already possess them. Otherwise, if they directly absorbed all of them into their minds, and only severed them if they were already present, this would end up damaging their bodies. After they finished, there were still 3 heavenly venerable seals remaining. These were heavenly venerable seals that all 3 of them already possessed. Ling Han accepted them back. He would leave them for his son and daughter. Seniors, do you reckon there's another dimension under this dimension? He suddenly asked. We've also considered this possibility. However, the resources here are yet to be fully split, so we haven't set out to investigate this, either, Zhu Heng replied. If there exists another dimension under this dimension, that will truly be a big matter. Dimensions overlapping one on top of another. This was something that had never occurred in the past. Just what in the world had caused this? To say nothing else, just the overlap of these 2 dimensions was already impossible to explain. Theoretically speaking, only the combined strength of several hundred 7th tier elites would be able to forcefully overlap a transcendent dimension with a high-level dimension. However, from past to present, had there ever been this many 7th tier elites? 7th tier elites were indestructible and undying, so how had several hundred 7th tier elites suddenly vanished without a trace? How was this possible? Perhaps an earth-shattering secret that can shake the foundations of the Genesis world is hidden in this place, Chu Hao said slowly. After chatting for a while, Ling Han took his leave. He toyed around with the broken saber, familiarizing himself with how to use it. This was very simple. As long as he activated it with his fundamental power, he would be able to unleash the might of the broken saber. However, because it was broken, it couldn't unleash the might of 7th tier elites. Instead, it could only unleash power equivalent to Ling Han's. However, this saber had killed far too many elites before, so as long as he pointed it in a certain direction and activated it a second time with his willpower, it would unleash a devastating murderous aura that could attack one's mind. This isn't enough to dispose of 5th tier elites. However, if I unleash it by surprise, it will be enough to buy me some time to escape, Ling Han murmured to himself. He had killed Xin Qihu's subordinates, so Xin Qihu definitely wouldn't let things slide just like that. If they were at the same cultivation level, would Ling Han be afraid of Xin Qihu? However, this person was at the 4th tier, and his battle prowess had already soared to the 5th tier. Right now, Ling Han was definitely no match for this kind of opponent. He needed some ways to protect himself. Ling Han decided to stay put for the moment. For the past few years, he, the Empress, and Hunyo had all relied on great herbs to elevate their cultivation. This wasn't something they had cultivated themselves, so it was inevitable that their cultivation was slightly unstable. Thus, they all decided to enter seclusion to stabilize their cultivation. This was especially the case with the Empress and Hunyo. They still yearned to break through the barrier of their current cultivation level to ascend to a higher tier. As for Ling Han, even though he had already reached the peak stage of the second tier, he was actually still some way off from breaking through. Moreover, there was a large number of powers of dimension inside his body, so even the final step before the breakthrough would require a lengthy amount of time. This was inevitable. This was the price for strength. Several 100 million years later, Hunyo and the Empress advanced one after the other, with one ascending to the fourth tier and one ascending to the third tier. The fourth tier was a dividing line. Combining all of the heavenly venerates in the myriad dimensions, the number of heavenly venerates under the fifth tier would be in the hundreds of thousands. This was a terrifying number. However, from the fifth tier onward, this number would start to drop drastically. Right now, there were around 1,000 fifth tier elites and around 100 sixth tier elites. There were even fewer seventh tier elites, with the total number possible to count on two hands. The reason for this was simple. From the fourth tier onward, the repulsion from the fundamental power would become far too powerful. Out of 10 fourth tier elites, 9 would fail to detect new fundamental particles. Thus, how could they communicate with them and use them to advance? This was also why the orange-colored great herbs were so valuable. These were herbs that could allow heavenly venerates to detect fundamental particles. If one wanted to advance from the fifth tier to the sixth tier, one would most likely need to rely on crimson-colored great herbs. However, up until now, no such great herbs had been found. Ling Han also stabilized his cultivation. However, he was still far away from being able to advance. If he wanted to slowly cultivate by himself, to say nothing of one epoch, this would at least take him 100 million to 200 million years. He still needed a huge amount of supremely valuable great herbs. If he managed to obtain them, he would merely need to enter seclusion a few more times to stabilize his cultivation. Father. Grandfather. Ling Han exited seclusion, only to see Ling Zhenxue and Ling Feifan walking over. You two finally know to come back, Ling Han said with a shake of his head. After going out on an adventure, this father and son pair had already forgotten about their father-grandfather. Hee. Ling Zhenxue and his son both chuckled as they recounted their experiences from the past years. Ling Zhenxue had already advanced to the second tier, while Ling Feifan had only just become a heavenly venerate. The genes of the Ling clan were far too powerful. However, this bloodline advantage only lasted for 2 generations, with Ling Feifan's children being nowhere near as freakish. They still had yet to become celestial kings. This great-grandson had been born several 100 million years ago. At that time, both Ling Han and Ling Feifan had been elsewhere. Thus, Ling Han had never met this great-grandson before. In any case, his descendants would naturally have their own fates and fortunes. Thus, he wouldn't stick his nose into every single matter. This was what Ling Han told himself. He pushed away the thoughts of wanting to personally raise his great-grandson, and he simply asked a little about his situation. This great-grandson was called Ling Tianhua, and he possessed a fairly decent cultivation aptitude. However, it was only decent, and not freakish. To say nothing of Ling Han, Ling Zhenxue, and Ling Feifan, he was still lagging far behind just compared to those of the same generation as him. Ling Han couldn't help but chuckle at himself. If his bloodline could remain powerful for generation after generation, then wouldn't the descendants of 7th tier elites all become heavenly venerates? If there's anything you want, just say it out loud, Ling Han said as he glanced at Ling Zhenxue and Ling Feifan. Father, what are you trying to say? Are you saying that we wouldn't visit you otherwise? Ling Zhenxue hurriedly said. Ling Han stood up, saying, I'm incredibly busy. If there's nothing important, then I'll continue to cultivate in seclusion. Wait. Ling Feifan exclaimed, hurriedly dragging Ling Han back. He then looked at Ling Zhenxue, and said, Father, what did I tell you? Grandpa is so brilliant and mighty, so of course he'll be able to see right through us. Enough with the flattery, Ling Han said. Hehe, it's like this, Ling Zhenxue said. While we were traveling around, we discovered a large mine that contains 10 veins of ores. However, a bunch of other people came before we could start digging. Our strength was similar, so choosing to fight would only have resulted in both sides being heavily wounded. Thus, we decided to settle things through a competition. We'll hold 10 battles, with each battle determining the ownership of a vein of ore. Father, we've come back to call for reinforcements. Chapter 2877, 2877 Can we have 3 more battles? Chapter 2877, 2877 Can we have 3 more battles? 2877 Can we have 3 more battles? Ling Han swept his gaze over his son. Sure enough, he would never return if not to ask for a favor. He would only remember his father when he had a favor to ask. Did they allow you to return to call for reinforcements? He asked. This was his son, so he would naturally help no matter what. We agreed that we could both invite helpers. However, the helpers can't be above the 2nd tier, Ling Zhenxue said. Otherwise, what use would it be? After fighting to the death among ourselves, if the 3rd tiers and 4th tiers decide to take the mine for themselves, how can we compete with them? Ling Han was amused, and he said, So you're asking me to help? You want me to be that person who speaks up and sends them scrambling? Ling Zhenxue shook his head, saying, Since we've already reached an agreement, we should play by the rules. Ling Han's son was a fairly stubborn and inflexible person. Ling Han couldn't help but sigh. Being stubborn was a shared trait, but where had he learned the trait of being inflexible? So be it, since this is my son's decision. Ling Han nodded in response. I'll help you. And Auntie Xing and Auntie Hu as well, Ling Zhenxue hurriedly added. Ling Han could only participate in a single battle. Ling Han pursed his lips and said, Your Auntie Xing has just advanced to the 3rd tier, and your Auntie Hu has just advanced to the 4th tier. Are you trying to break the rules? Ling Zhenxue couldn't help but feel disappointed. He was someone who always kept his word. Meanwhile, Ling Feifen stood there murmuring to himself, saying that this was a world where might was right. Yet, his father was so stubborn and inflexible, so how in the world had he given birth to a mischievous son like him? Moreover, his grandpa was also full of tricks and extremely toxic toward opponents, yet somehow none of this had passed down to Ling Zhenxue. Ling Han clapped his hands, and said, All right, let's set off. The 3 of them set off. In Ling Han's eyes, this was only a small matter, so he didn't mind going over and helping out a little. 1 month later, they arrived at the foot of a large mountain. They then entered the mountain. After several more hours, a canyon appeared before them. There were already many people waiting there. They were mostly all heavenly venerates, and those who weren't were all at the 9th heaven. This dimension was far too difficult to reach, with the combusting fundamental particles forming a barrier that was extremely challenging for even 9th heaven celestial kings to pass. Drawing someone into a spatial tool to bring them over? That was also impossible. The combusting fundamental particles would affect even the space inside a heavenly venerate tool. Thus, bringing someone in a spatial tool would be nothing more than a death sentence. Indeed, Ling Han had also left the celestial guest residence in the uppermost space. He had no option but to do this. Thus, those who were here were all at least 9th heaven celestial kings. It was also because of this that the mines in the dimension were opened up a lot slower than the other dimensions. There were only 9th heaven celestial kings to use, and even the heavenly venerates would have to get down and dirty themselves. However, did heavenly venerates not need to cultivate? There was a severe shortage of personnel, which resulted in the mine being opened up extremely slowly. Otherwise, this was nothing more than a damaged high-level dimension, so the mines should have been cleaned up long ago. The people in the canyon were very clearly divided into 2 parties. The atmosphere was tense, and it was as if a huge battle might break out at any moment. Ling Zhenxue, you were gone for so long, yet you only brought back a single helper, a solidly built man with messy red hair said. Ling Zhenxue wore a slightly awkward expression. He had initially wanted to bring Hu Niu and the Empress over as well, yet he hadn't imagined that they would have already advanced beyond the 2nd tier. This is my father, Ling Han, he introduced. The red-haired man clasped his hands, and said, "Friend Ling." The people in his camp all nodded toward Ling Han in greeting. It was clear that they were all allied with Ling Zhenxue. "Huh. Ling Han. This name seems fairly familiar," someone murmured. However, they didn't immediately recall why. "Since the final person has arrived, let us begin the competition," someone from the other side said. "Very well, let us begin." The two sides drew lots to decide who would send out a person first. They would then take turns afterward. After drawing lots, it was their opponents who would send a person first. After discussing for a while, they sent out a woman in pink who was as beautiful as flowers. After reaching the heavenly venerable tier, one would be able to transform themselves on a fundamental level. Being transcendent above the regulations, to say nothing of their appearance, they would even be able to freely change their aptitude. Thus, it was almost impossible to come across ugly heavenly venerates. There were only those who were more unique. "I'm Yu Lan, who's willing to spar with me," the female heavenly venerate said with a smile. Ling Zhenxue and the others also discussed it for a while before sending out a person. Their battle lasted 3 days, yet it was heavenly venerate Yu Lan who emerged victorious by a whisker. For the second battle, Ling Zhenxue and the others sent a person out first. However, they suffered another loss. After 6 battles, Ling Zhenshue's side suffered 6 losses in a row. This caused everyone's morale to be extremely low. Perhaps they were going to lose all 10 battles. For the 7th battle, it was their opponent who sent someone out first. It was an elegant young man. Gasp. Mi Wenbai is personally going to battle? Do they want to take this 7th battle in a single breath as well? They want to crush our fighting spirit. But Mi Wenbai is already at the peak stage of the 2nd tier. I heard that he more so fused together with the power of 7 dimensions while he was at the 1st tier, so his battle prowess far exceeds that of ordinary elites at the peak stage of the 2nd tier. We should just send some random person for this battle. We can still fight for victory in the final 3 matches. We'll strive to obtain 3 veins of ore. The cultivators on Ling Zhenshue's side all wore apprehensive expressions. Their opponents had sent out their strongest member, and, truthfully speaking, not a single one of them could rival him. They would inevitably lose this battle. However, whom should they send? As heavenly venerates, all of them cared about their face. Thus, who would be willing to step forward to suffer a guaranteed loss? In fact, they might even suffer severe wounds from the battle. That would be a great misfortune. They all exchanged glances. However, no one stepped forward. Mi Wenbai smiled faintly, and said, "No one is going to accept this battle. Then I'll consider that a forfeit. I'll stay on for the 8th battle as well." How could he do this? However, who dared to oppose him? Ling Zhenxue glanced at Ling Han, and said, "Father, it's time for you to do something." Ling Han's mind was elsewhere. He was currently observing the veins of ore here to determine whether there was anything valuable. Thus, he didn't hear Ling Zhenshue's words. Only when his son nudged him with his elbow did he come to his senses. "Ah, sure thing," he replied casually. He confidently strode forward. Everyone shook their head, lamenting that Ling Zhenxue was screwing his father over. This battle was a guaranteed loss, and there was even a possibility of suffering severe wounds, yet Ling Zhenxue had actually convinced his father to accept the challenge. Just how dodgy was that? "You're not going to forfeit?" Mi Wenbai asked with a smile. Ling Han shrugged, and said, "I've never had such a habit." Mi Wenbai didn't get angry, and he said, "Then I'm so sorry, because you'll develop that habit in the future." "Heh." Ling Han picked at his ears, and said, "Are you trying to defeat me by running your mouth?" Mi Wenbai's smile froze. Running his mouth? It was Ling Han who was running his mouth, okay? His expression turned cold, and he said calmly, "Enraging me will do you no good at all. Enough with the nonsense," Ling Han said as he strode over. Just how quick were heavenly venerates? Even though he wasn't going at full speed, he still arrived before Mi Wenbai in just 3 steps. He then threw a punch. What audacity! Peng! Before Mi Wenbai could even finish speaking, he was already sent flying by Ling Han's punch. Peng! Peng, peng. In a single breath, he crashed through a dozen or so mountains, and only then was his momentum stopped. He sank into a large mountain. This. Everyone fell silent, with many gasping in shock. This was simply inconceivable. That was Mi Wenbai. Yet, he had failed to withstand even a single strike. Ling Han retracted his fist, saying smilingly, "Can I stay for the other 3 battles?" Chapter 2878, 2878 Rematch. Chapter 2878, 2878 Rematch. 2878 Rematch. Upon hearing Ling Han's words, the cultivators on the opposing side hurriedly shook their heads. Even Mi Wenbai couldn't withstand a single strike from Ling Han, so anyone who dared to step forward would naturally be instantly defeated by him as well. If they allowed Ling Han to stay on for 3 more battles, that would simply be a matter of him throwing 3 more punches. At that time, another 3 veins of ores would be taken away by him. Ling Han. Ling Han. I remember now. Finally, the person who had felt a sense of familiarity with Ling Han's name clapped his hands, exclaiming. This was someone who had created history before. This was someone with peerless courage. Ling Han involuntarily sighed. Why couldn't the victor stay behind for more battles? What kind of crappy rule was this? He walked back to his spot. Meanwhile, those on his side still had yet to come to their senses. Their minds were still numb with shock. Afterward, Ling Zhenxue stepped forward to battle. Taking advantage of Ling Han's remnant might that was still to disappear, with their opponents still reeling in shock, he also won his battle. However, their opponent finally came to their senses for the remaining 2 battles. Thus, they were able to nab the final 2 victories. As a result, their opponents won 8 of the 10 veins of ore, while Ling Han and the others could only take 2. Ling Han couldn't help but sigh with emotion. Throughout his cultivation journey, he had never been on the receiving end of an unfair deal. He had always enjoyed the upper hand. Now, however, they had actually lost, winning only 2 of the 10 veins of ore. This was utter humiliation. However, there was nothing he could do about this. Who told his son to be so stubborn and inflexible? Anyhow, how would they decide which vein of ore belonged to whom? At this moment, Ling Han displayed his domineering side, not caring for others' opinions as he directly chose 2 veins of ores. He didn't allow anyone to oppose him. His words were, "If anyone has any objections, tell me after you defeat me." Who dared to battle him? Just look at Mi Wenbai. He still had yet to regain consciousness. No one opposed him, so everything was settled. Ling Zhenxue walked over, and asked, "Father, you're not some kind of raw stone appraisal grandmaster, so why are you randomly acting with such conviction?" In fact, he had also invited a raw stone appraisal grandmaster over. After all, it was possible that the veins of ores would be worthless, so they naturally had to pick the most valuable ones. However, Ling Han's decision bypassed the raw stone appraisal grandmaster, and left him with nothing to do. The grandmaster continued to murmur that Ling Han was acting far too willfully. Ling Han waved his hand, and said, "Ignore him. How could he be acting willfully? The 2 veins of ore that he had chosen were the most valuable ones. However, it had to be said that all 10 veins of ore were fairly decent, with not a single one of them being worthless. The next day, they all started to mine the veins of ore. There wasn't much personnel to use, so they all had no option but to do the hard work themselves. What did it matter that they were heavenly venerates? They still had to mine the ore personally. Moreover, they had already reached an agreement. Each person would keep whatever they unearthed. Everything would be down to luck. Ling Han naturally wouldn't hold back. In any case, if it weren't for him, these people wouldn't have even received a single vein of ore. He walked from one side of the mine to the other, drawing a large amount of valuable raw stone into his spatial celestial tool. After his comprehensive scan, even though there were still some raw stones left, how could there be anything of great value? Everyone felt a sense of frustration. After digging for half a day, why could they only find divine metal? Meanwhile, their opponents would obtain supreme great herbs from time to time. Even though they were only blue-colored or purple-colored, this was still enough to fill them with envy. This was all Ling Han's fault. Why had he insisted on picking these 2 veins of ore? However, they didn't dare to say anything. Yet, the raw stone appraisal grandmaster that they had invited wasn't afraid to speak his mind at all. His standing was transcendent, so taking advantage of their reliance on him, he continued to scold Ling Han again and again. This ticked Ling Feifen off, so he grabbed the grandmaster and gave him a good pummeling. No one stood up for the raw stone appraisal grandmaster. Even though it was Ling Feifen who had acted, who didn't know that this was at Ling Han's behest? In any case, even if this were Ling Feifen's personal decision, he was still Ling Han's grandson, after all, so who dared to target Ling Feifen? This infuriated the raw stone appraisal grandmaster, who eventually stormed off in rage. With Ling Han's current standing, he naturally wouldn't pay attention to what a raw stone appraisal grandmaster thought of him. If he were annoyed, he could easily smash him to death with a single punch. Right now, however, he was entirely focused on the raw stones that he had unearthed. He was extremely satisfied. He silently made riches as he opened up the raw stones. In the end, he obtained over 20 great herbs and 7 heavenly venerable seals. However, it was a shame that he already possessed all of them. Thus, he gave all 7 of these heavenly venerable seals to his son. Along with these, he also gave him some great herbs. "Father, you obtained all of these?" Ling Jianxue asked in astonishment. Ling Han nodded in reply. Fuck. Who dared to accuse his father of acting willfully? This was already more than the sum of what their opposition had obtained from the 8 veins of ore. Because they only had 2 veins of ore, it wasn't long before they finished cleaning them up. Now, everyone would head over to the other side to take a peek every day. Even if they couldn't obtain these treasures, they could at least have a feast for their eyes. Comparing their gains, however, they couldn't help but feel angry. Was there any comparison? They grumbled in frustration, and this caused those on Mi1Bai's side to roar with laughter. Even though they had lost 2 matches, and therefore lost 2 veins of ore, Ling Han's willful decision had caused the other side to directly obtain the 2 least valuable veins of ore. This was equivalent to Ling Han giving them a big present. This naturally caused Ling Han to become the butt of their jokes. At the same time, he was also blamed by his own allies. However, Ling Han and his son and grandson remained silent as they bathed in the riches themselves. There was no need to tell everyone about this, was there? Moreover, everyone believed that he was a fool when it came to stone gambling, so perhaps he could still screw more people over. After a while, something unexpected occurred. After all 10 veins of ore were mined, another vein of ore surprisingly appeared underground. This vein of ore had been hidden underneath the 10 other veins of ore, which had acted as somewhat of a jacket. One had to realize that heavenly venerable stone could block the divine sense of heavenly venerates, so none of them had been able to detect this vein of ore. Even Ling Han had been unable to detect it. It was only when he saw it that he came to a sudden realization. However, there was only a single vein of ore, so whom would it belong to? Having seen Ling Han's strength, their opponents naturally didn't suggest another battle to settle things. Mi1Bai and his companions racked their brains thinking about how to obtain this vein of ore. Eventually, they settled on a stone gambling competition with Ling Han. Everyone knew that only celestial kings could become raw stone appraisal grandmasters. This was because heavenly venerable stones had a special obstructive property against heavenly venerates. As if detested by heaven and earth, heavenly venerates were unable to become raw stone appraisal grandmasters. Of course, heavenly venerates weren't too annoyed by this. After all, heavenly venerable stones only existed in this one place, so there would eventually come a day when they managed to mine all of them. Mi1Bai and the others' suggestion of a stone gambling competition was naturally met with fierce opposition from the red-haired man. After all, there wasn't a raw stone appraisal grandmaster among them. Ling Han had already caused him to storm off in rage. Thus, how could they compete? He insisted on settling things through a battle. Both parties refused to budge. This was until Ling Han spoke, accepting the proposal of a stone gambling competition. If they wanted to settle things through a battle, he would refuse to step forward. Thus, the red-haired man and the others naturally had no option but to accept this compromise. Apart from Ling Han, Who else could suppress Mi when by? But a stone gambling competition? Sigh. None of them held any hope. This was already a guaranteed loss. However, what could they do? Ling Han was so domineering, so who would dare to oppose him? How are we going to do this stone gambling competition? Ling Zhenxue asked on Ling Han's behalf. We'll each pick 3 raw stones to put forward. We'll then compare their total value, those on Mi Wenbai's side said. Very well, Ling Zhenxue said, agreeing to these conditions on Ling Han's behalf. Mi Wenbai and the others immediately sent out their raw stone appraisal grandmaster. Everyone referred to him as Grandmaster Qian, with his full name being Qian Wang. He was at the 9th heaven, yet all of the heavenly venerates treated him as an esteemed guest. He was truly living a grand life. Qian Wang was extremely aloof, and he said to Ling Han, I don't bully others, so I'll allow you to pick 10 raw stones to compete with me. This was extremely arrogant, yet it was perfectly in line with the demeanor of raw stone appraisal grandmasters. They were far too spoiled at this moment. Ling Han didn't mind this, and he said with a faint smile, sure thing. Chapter 2879, 2879 Outsider. Chapter 2879, 2879 Outsider. 2879 Outsider. When the red-haired man heard Qian Wang's words, hope rose in his heart. If he chose 10 pieces, what if he was lucky and all the pieces contained treasure, and the total value surpassed Qian Wang? Sometimes, no matter how strong one was, he would still cry when he encountered someone with luck that was off the charts. Choose first, Qian Wang said in an arrogant tone. When he had still been a celestial king one, he hadn't even been able to see a heavenly venerate, but now he could be surrounded by heavenly venerates, and was treated with the utmost courtesy. This caused his favorable opinion of himself to spike sky high. Ling Han shook his head. This kind of person did not have the wisdom of Grandmaster Shenlai. He could be willful and arrogant for now, but there was a 99% chance that he would die on the streets in the future. Sure, Ling Han said nonchalantly as he casually walked around the vein of ore, and dug out 10 raw stones. Qian Wang also started walking around. He walked back and forth a few times before finally choosing 3 raw stones. The red-haired man and the others all shook their heads. There was definitely no chance now. Look, the other Grandmaster of Raw Stone had taken such a long time to make his choice, yet Ling Han had just randomly picked 10 stones. How could this be compared? Open the stone, Qian Wang said calmly, putting on airs. Sure. Ling Han began to cut the stone. His power was extremely strong, and he knew the contents like the back of his hand. Thus, in just a few breaths' time, the contents appeared. This was a great herb, green in color. Fuck. Seeing this scene, everyone was stunned. This luck was heaven-defying. A random stone could produce a supremely valuable medicine. Hope was reignited in the red-haired man. Green great herbs were extremely precious. Even if Ling Han's remaining 9 raw stones were all useless, he might still be able to win with this great herb. The mouths of Mi Wenbai and the rest twitched. So what if he was a Grandmaster of Raw Stone? He was no match against such good luck, right? Qian Wang's mouth was half gaping. He wasn't a first-generation Grandmaster of Raw Stone like Grandmaster Shenlai, but belonged to the generation of his disciples and grand-disciples. They had some skills in stone gambling, but their abilities were far inferior to Grandmaster Xuanlai's. He knew that there were treasures contained in the 3 raw stones he had chosen, but he had no idea what these treasures were. Ling Han's first move was a green great herb, completely disrupting his plans and causing him to start panicking. How could Ling Han care about him? He continued to cut another raw stone. Here's another treasure, everyone exclaimed. The second raw stone still revealed a great herb, but the grade was slightly inferior to the first. It was only blue. However, with 2 great herbs in front of him, Ling Han was practically unbeatable. Mi Wenbai and the others were about to fall into despair. What kind of luck did Ling Han have? Wasn't his luck a bit too good? The 3rd, 4th, and 5th raw stones were also cut one by one. They all contained great herbs. Not only did 2 green ones appear, but there was also a yellow one, which shocked and made everyone's eyes turn bloodshot. Qian Wang had already flopped onto the ground. Unless he unearthed 3 heavenly venerable seals in a row, he would definitely lose. However, Ling Han then unearthed 4 heavenly venerable seals in a row, completely cutting off his hopes. I admit defeat, Qian Wang said in a bitter tone. He looked meaningfully at Ling Han. This guy was definitely pretending to be a pig to eat a tiger too. He refused to believe that anyone's luck was this good, even if someone threatened to twist his head off if he did not. This was already expected, but hearing Qian Wang admit defeat personally, everyone still felt a sense of absurdity about the whole situation. Could it be that Ling Han was also a Grandmaster of Raw Stone? However, who didn't know that it was impossible for a heavenly venerate to become a Grandmaster of Raw Stone? That was absolutely impossible. However, no one would believe that Ling Han's luck was so heaven-defying, either. Ling Han smiled faintly, but didn't act ruthlessly. He turned around and said to Ling Zhenxue, "What are you waiting for? Hurry up." The red-haired man and the others also came to their senses as if they had just woken up from a dream. Ling Han had one, so this vein of raw stone naturally belonged to them now, so they could start choosing stones. Wait. However, just as they were about to move, they heard a voice that carried an extremely terrifying pressure. Who was it? Everyone turned around and saw 2 people walking over. One of them looked to be in his 20s. He had a handsome face and a slender figure. He emanated boundless light, and his breath was filled with the air of primal chaos. He was incomparably terrifying. Meanwhile, the person beside him was only a 9th heaven celestial king. He seemed insignificant beside his companion's aura, but everyone's eyes were fixed on him. This was because he was the Grandmaster of Raw Stone that the red-haired man had invited previously, and Ling Han had driven him off in fury. They had not expected that not only had he returned, he had even brought an outsider with him. Clearly, they did not come with good intentions. "Who are you?" the red-haired man asked. Mi Wenbai and the others, on the other hand, acted as if it had nothing to do with them. In any case, this vein of or already belonged to Ling Han and the others, so they were happy to just sit by and watch the show. Peng. The response to the red-haired man was a punch from the young man. It was unstoppable, and sent the red-haired man flying. "A mere second tier dares to be presumptuous in front of me," the young man said coldly. His gaze swept over, and a terrifying aura spread out, causing everyone to involuntarily lower their gazes, not daring to meet his eyes. "I'm Nailander." He retracted his gaze. "Everything here belongs to me. You people can get lost." Yet Ling Zhenxue looked at the Grandmaster of Raw Stone beside him, and said, "Grandmaster Hu, we agreed that you had to keep this a secret." Grandmaster Hu sneered. "You publicly humiliated me and want me to keep it a secret for you. How laughable." Peng. The force of a punch surged over, and Grandmaster Hu was immediately turned into a rain of blood. Ling Han retracted his fist, and casually dusted it off. Hiss, this guy was really bold. He killed just like that, not giving Nailander any face at all. Nailander's expression darkened. He was a 4th-tier heavenly venerate, and could suppress everyone here single-handedly, but Ling Han actually dared to kill someone in front of him, and the man he had killed was one of his own at that, so how could he not be angry? He said menacingly, "How dare you, you even dare to." Peng. He hadn't even finished speaking when he saw Ling Han's fist fly towards him. "You're courting death." Nailander humphed coldly, and threw out his own fist to meet the attack. As he saw it, the power of his punch could instantly destroy Ling Han's attack, and then continue to attack without any loss of power, blasting Ling Han into pieces. Boom. The 2 forces collided, but the result was completely different from what Nailander had imagined. The power of his fist had collapsed with a single blow, and the force of Ling Han's punch was still surging over explosively. What? He turned pale with fright, and then looked at Ling Han. His entire body was glowing with the light of seals, and there were over 100 of them. This was... Boom. Power gushed over, and he was instantly blasted into a rain of blood. So what if he had been tempered by 3 fundamental powers? He couldn't withstand a single blow at all. One last thought flashed through his mind. These were combination seals, and there were shockingly many of them. Nailander was dead. Everyone's scalp went numb. So what if Grandmaster Hu was dead? He was only a ninth heaven celestial king, after all, and the so-called Grandmaster of Raw Stone was just an elevated status. However, Naylander was a genuine heavenly venerate, and his strength was definitely far above everyone else's. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to make everyone tremble with fear just by looking at him. Such an elite could not even withstand a single blow from Ling Han. Ling Han dispersed the heavenly venerable seals and acted as if nothing had happened. Fourth tier. This wasn't the first time he had killed one of them. Chapter 2880, 2880 Shin Chihu arrives. Chapter 2880, 2880 Shin Chihu arrives. 2880 Shin Chihu arrives. Large amounts of life essence surged into Ling Han's body, pushing his cultivation level further by a small margin. After all, Naylander was a fourth tier, which was equivalent to 2 or 3 green great herbs. I'll take my leave. I have something on too. I'll take my leave first. I don't have anything to do with the Vainov anyway, so I won't waste time. In an instant, most of the people had left. Everyone was afraid that Ling Han would suddenly make a move. This guy could even insta-kill a fourth-tier cultivator. This was too terrifying. Previously, although everyone had known that Ling Han had been strong, they had believed that they could have still contended against him if they had joined forces. However, now that they had seen that even Naylander had been instantly killed, they were horrified and shocked. They knew that the difference in strength between them and Ling Han was too great. Ling Han didn't stop them. He naturally wouldn't take these people seriously. However, very quickly, someone walked over and said, "Ling Han, you have to be careful. Naylander has an elder brother, and he's a 5th tier heavenly venerate. Although 5th tier was only 1 level higher than 4th tier, the strength could be said to have improved by leaps and bounds." Ling Han was astounded. These two brothers were both heavenly venerates, and one was in the 4th tier, while the other was in the 5th tier. This was a little shocking. Could it be that their old man was in the 7th tier? He asked that person in detail, but the answer he received was not what he had anticipated. The two brothers were actually from a very ordinary background, and they had relied on their own hard work to reach their current heights. If it had to be said, it was Naylander's elder brother, Nayland Xiong, who had taken great care of his younger brother. Otherwise, Naylander shouldn't have been able to reach the 4th tier, or at least not so quickly. Nayland Xiong was currently exploring a palace here with others. It had long been reduced to ruins. However, the fact that everything else here had been destroyed, but there was still a palace left behind, was enough to prove how extraordinary this palace was. Perhaps it was the palace of a 7th tier that contained an astonishing inheritance. Ling Han nodded at that person, and said, "Thank you." That person smiled, and said, "I am Yang Po, and I hope to be able to meet Brother Ling again in the future." He wanted to form a good relationship with Ling Han, and perhaps it would be of great use in the future. Moreover, he would only be gaining from this at no cost to himself. It was just a piece of information or a clue, and there was no need for him to pay any price. No problem. Ling Han accepted this favor. Soon, only Ling Han, his son, and his grandson remained in the canyon. Ling Han continued to open stones. With his stone-searching ability to see, the speed at which he opened the stones was naturally astonishing. Very quickly, he had completely mined the entire vein of ore, and his harvest was astonishing. There were a total of 7 heavenly venerable seals, 13 great herbs, countless pieces of divine metal, and 1 piece of devouring metal. Ling Han planned to specially use great accomplishment level devouring metal to create a spatial tool which would be augmented with the heavenly venerate technique to form an ultimate defense. It wasn't that a separate dimension could not be created in the interior of the divine demon sword, just like the Black Tower back then. However, a precious tool that focused on offense was definitely not as good in defense as one that specialized in defense. Ling Han collected 5 of the heavenly venerable seals, and the remaining 2 were given to Ling Zhenxue and his son. The great herbs were all given to Ling Han's son and grandson. With the abilities he possessed, obtaining great herbs could be said to be as easy as flipping his hand. Ling Zhenxue and his son didn't return to the base, but continued to explore. The discovery of this dimension, or rather, this overlapped dimension, was like a huge treasure that had been bestowed to all the heavenly venerates, and everyone could benefit from it. It was now or never. Meanwhile, Ling Han returned. He wanted to upgrade the newly obtained devouring metal, refine it into a precious treasure of heavenly venerable tier, and bring bewitching Maiden Ru, Liu Yutong, and the others over as well. He walked forward, and every step he took would bring him to an endless distance. Heavenly venerates ignored regulations, and there were no regulations here. Even ninth heaven celestial kings could exert extraordinary speed. After walking for 3 days, Ling Han's heart suddenly stirred, and he stopped in his tracks. "Come, have a cup of tea with me." A vigorous and domineering voice rang out. Ling Han smiled faintly, and said, "Drinking tea depends on the person. As for you, I don't seem to be very interested in joining you for tea." There was a pavilion up ahead, and in the pavilion, there was a person drinking tea. His white clothes fluttered in the wind, and he was a handsome man. It was Shin Chi-hu. "Ha ha ha." Shin Chi-hu laughed loudly. "You're indeed very bold. You have to know that even 4th tiers are nothing in front of me. They don't even dare to breathe loudly. Congratulations, you've met your match," Ling Han said calmly. "My match? Not really." Shin Chi-hu shook his head. "If you were in the 4th tier, I might be able to view you as an opponent, but a mere 2nd tier? I'm only here to kill you." "Oh, do you dare to fight me at the same cultivation level?" Ling Han provoked. "Ling Han, with the height that I have reached, will provocation be effective on me?" Shin Chi-hu asked with a smile. He was already publicly acknowledged as the greatest prodigy of all eternity, and could not be elevated any further. He also did not have to worry about falling off the pedestal. How could he act on impulse? Ling Han laughed, and said, "Then what nonsense are you talking about? Let's fight. You should have accepted my kind offer and helped me find veins of ore." Shin Chi-hu shook his head, appearing to be a little regretful. "Unfortunately, not only did you not agree, you even killed one of my men. Therefore, you must die." He made a move. Boom. With a flip of his right hand, the sky trembled, and countless heavenly bodies were born and destroyed in his hands. One exhalation was equivalent to 10,000 lifetimes, describing the various wonders of the universe, and displaying his comprehension of Tao. This was definitely the battle prowess of a 5th tier. As the might flowed, Ling Han didn't even need to face it head-on to know that he was definitely not a match for it. It couldn't be helped. The two of them were 2 whole cultivation levels apart, and Shin Chi-hu was the greatest prodigy of all eternity. In a battle of the same cultivation level, even if his strength was inferior to Ling Han's, he wouldn't be much weaker. How could Ling Han possibly be a match for him? Without any hesitation, Ling Han immediately drew out his broken saber. Hong! A murderous aura surged out, striking towards Shin Chi-hu. This exceeded Shin Chi-hu's expectations, and he was instantly struck by the murderous aura. Because this was not a strike of force, its speed was much faster, and he was caught off guard. This murderous aura was too terrifying. It was formed from the endless slaughter of a 7th tier heavenly venerate, and had definitely drunk a large amount of 6th tier blood. Even a peerless prodigy like Shin Chi-hu could not help but grunt, and the space between his brows immediately split open, causing a stream of blood to flow out. Ling Han sighed. If he was currently in the 3rd tier, then he would still be qualified to fight with Shin Chi-hu. Even if he was no match for Shin Chi-hu, it shouldn't be difficult for him to escape. However, if he was in the 2nd tier, that wouldn't do. If he went up to fight, he would definitely be instantly killed. He turned around and left. Ling Han. Shin Chi-hu's furious roar came from behind. He had already recovered and was chasing after Ling Han. As expected of an absolute elite of 4th tier. His speed was too high, and even though he was affected by the murderous aura of the broken saber, the effect only lasted an instant. Shin Chi-hu, I'll spare your life this time. When I cultivate to the 4th tier, watch how I fight a tiger. Ling Han laughed, and the broken saber struck out again. One. Shio. Another saber strike was sent out, and the saber light turned into one 30,000 meters long. Shin Chi-hu launched a furious punch. Peng! The saber chi instantly crumbled. However, He let out another muffled groan as a bloody wound appeared on his fist. It turned out that this slash not only had the power of the broken saber itself, but it also had an additional murderous aura. Thus, although Shinchihu had dissolved the saber chi with one punch, his hand was still injured by the saber chi. He was filled with hatred. Ever since he had started cultivating, how many times had he been injured? What more when he was injured by an ant whose cultivation level was inferior to his own? His gaze was cold, and his face was filled with killing intent. Chapter 2881, 2881 Escape. Chapter 2881, 2881 Escape. 2881 Escape. Shinchihu gave chase. Killing intent shot out of his eyes and materialized, and his entire body exuded a terrifying aura. The sky and earth around him collapsed piece by piece, and his power was so strong that he had reached the 5th tier. A single move from him could make heaven and earth pale in color. Such an existence was truly disrupting the balance of heaven and earth. No wonder he was hated by heaven and earth. However, the heaven and earth here was already dead, and it was impossible to restrict him at all, allowing Shinchihu to unleash his full battle prowess. His speed was higher than Ling Han's, and he caught up to Ling Han not long afterwards. Ling Han used the same trick, and swiped out the saber again, slashing towards Shinchihu. This time, Shinchihu was prepared. He took out a long silver staff and struck it toward the saber chi. Boom! The saber chi was shattered, turning into fragments that filled the sky. A murderous aura surged, and it still possessed terrifying destructive power. Shinchihu did not dare to force his way through. What he was afraid of was not the power attack from the broken saber, but the terrifying murderous aura that could materialize and cause damage to his body. However, the name of greatest prodigy of all eternity was not just for show. He did not force his way through. Instead, he threw a punch that landed on the shattered afterimages, causing blood to appear on his fist again. Ling Han saw this, but he did not feel the slightest bit of happiness. This was because Shinchihu knew that because he had always been wary of the saber chi, he would only continue to be blocked. He wanted to change this result by trying to use the power of his fists to destroy the murderous aura. If it were Ling Han, he would also do the same and take the initiative to adapt to this murderous aura. After all, it had already been dispersed by the precious tool, and its lethality could not be compared. However, Ling Han could not do anything. He could only flee. There was a hint of a smile at the corners of his mouth. Being pursued by the greatest prodigy of all eternity like Shinchihu brought enormous pressure. Perhaps it could help him advance to the peak of the 2nd tier, and advance into the 3rd tier from there. This was also an opportunity for Ling Han, and opportunity always coexisted with danger. One was fleeing, and the other was chasing. Every time Shinchihu caught up, Ling Han would use his broken saber to attack, buying himself time and space to escape again. 10 days, a month, and half a year passed. Time continued to pass, but the two prodigies were still embroiled in a pursuit. Ling Han felt that the power in his body was becoming purer and purer, and he had a feeling that he was about to sublimate. As for Shinchihu, he adapted to the murderous aura better and better, and it was very likely that he would cross this threshold. Ling Han, how much longer can you run? Shinchihu sneered. He believed that he would be able to truly adapt to the threat of that murderous aura in at most 3 days. At that time, Ling Han would no longer have any way to stop him. None of the people that Shinchihu wanted to kill could ever escape. Ling Han did not reply. He still had one last move. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye as Shinchihu gave chase. When Ling Han swung his saber again, the former let out a cold laugh. A wave of his staff shattered the saber chi, and his entire body continued to charge forward, charging into the vast expanse of shattered saber afterimages. Shinchihu still couldn't face the saber chi head-on, but after shattering it, he was no longer afraid. Shio! Shinchihu charged over, and he struck towards Ling Han with a sweep of his staff. Take a hit from me too. This staff strike was too terrifying. It was as if the entire dimension was pressing down on Ling Han, and it could destroy everything. If Shinchihu was placed in a medium-level dimension, his attack would indeed be this powerful. The battle prowess of 5th tier was comparable to the eruption of a medium-level dimension. It was impossible for Ling Han to block it. The difference in battle prowess between the two of them was truly too great. He no longer hesitated. With a thought, "Xiao," his figure suddenly disappeared. Boom! Xin Chihu's staff instantly missed its target. What in the world was going on? Xin Chihu stopped, and a look of surprise appeared on his face. If Ling Han had torn open space to escape, then the former would have been able to sense it. However, although this was a dimension, it was a dead dimension. There were no regulations at all, and it was located in the void. How were you going to break through space in the void? How could there be space for you to break through? He broke through the void and returned to this dimension? Xin Chihu murmured. But this wasn't right, either. Without the dimension coordinates, he should have had no idea how to get out. Strange, how did this brat disappear into thin air? Xin Chihu stood there for a long time before turning to leave. He would definitely find Ling Han again, and at that time, he would not give him any chance to escape. He would insta-kill him with one strike, and he did not mind even if it was a sneak attack. At his level, would he still care about others' opinions? Ling Han had, of course, used the endless powers of dimension in his body as a guide, and directly returned to the dimension. Others might not be able to do it, but he was different. He could travel freely in the Genesis world. This was naturally not the flaming frost realm, but a low-level dimension. Sensing the terrifying power in his body, heaven and earth reacted instantly, sending down layers of heavenly tribulation to obliterate him. Of course, this was a waste of effort. Ling Han did not pay it any mind, either. He frowned slightly. Xin Chihu was really quite shameless. He was clearly the greatest prodigy of all eternity, yet he did not even dare to fight him at the same cultivation level. Therefore, not only was Xin Chihu a prodigy, but he was also an ambitious and ruthless person. He only wanted results, and did not care about the process. He only wanted Ling Han dead, and it didn't matter what method he used to kill him. Ling Han scratched his head. Even if he advanced into the 3rd tier, he would probably only be on par with the other party. In fact, he would still be slightly inferior. Only if they were both in the 4th tier would he have enough confidence to suppress the other party. It couldn't be helped. Xin Chihu himself was a peerless freakish genius. How could he be taken lightly? If I get a few more great herbs, I'll have the confidence to break through to the 3rd tier, Ling Han muttered. Although advancing to the 3rd tier would not allow him to suppress Xin Chihu, at least he would be able to oppose him then. With a thought, he tore open space, and headed toward the mysterious dimension in the void again. However, while it was easy to come out, it wasn't easy to go back, because that dimension didn't have coordinates. Ling Han entered the void, and then followed his memories as he headed in that direction. His speed was great, but there was only an endless energy storm in the void, and the scenery didn't change at all. Even if he walked for 100 or 1,000 years, it was as if he was just circling endlessly. Soon, I'm almost there, Ling Han said to himself. After walking for more than 10 years, he finally had a feeling that the lost primitive dimension was not far away. But right at this moment, an indescribable palpitation arose in his heart. Before he could react, a black whip lashed toward him. How could there be a whip in the void? And who could ambush him so accurately? Hysteria. Fuck, why did I run into it again? Does the void belong to it? Why can it just come out of nowhere? Ling Han hurriedly tore open space again. He had to escape from the void. Otherwise, if he fell into Hysteria's hands, he really didn't know what would happen. He wasn't a 7th tier, so he couldn't be undying and indestructible. In a certain medium-level dimension, a celestial king was refining his celestial tool at the crater of a volcano. He had already been here for 200 million years, and he was only a step away from success. There was a look of excitement on his face. Forging a celestial tool with his own hands was like watching his own child being born. It was an indescribable sense of joy and accomplishment. Thud. A look of shock suddenly appeared on his face because a huge space had suddenly appeared in the magma layer beneath the volcano's crater. There was void energy surging, but this was not the most important thing. There was actually a man who had fallen out of it. There was a black rope wrapped around his ankle, and upon closer inspection, it seemed to be some kind of tentacle that emitted an extremely evil aura. Fuck, what the hell was this? Chapter 2882, 2882 Shocking Connection. Chapter 2882, 2882 Shocking Connection. 2882 Shocking Connection. This celestial king's name was Yang Jiuling, and he had only broken through to the celestial king tier a billion years ago. However, divine metal was hard to come by, so it wasn't until 200 million years ago that he finally managed to obtain a piece, and was able to forge his own precious tool. Being able to become a celestial king, he had naturally seen a lot of things. However, when he suddenly saw the volcano erupting and a person running out, he was still so shocked that he couldn't control himself. One had to know that this was a volcanic crater that could refine divine metal. The scorching heat was extremely terrifying, and even 7th heaven or 8th heaven celestial kings could be burned to ashes by the extreme heat. Thus, he was shocked, and the celestial tool in his hand instantly dropped. Pa! It fell into the boiling lava. Ah, my celestial tool, he exclaimed, his expression full of regret. Unless he advanced into the 8th heaven, he would not be able to withstand such scorching heat. Otherwise, he would be courting death if he rashly went down into the lava. At this moment, he naturally hated the man in front of him to death. However, the other party could actually appear from the lava. Just how terrifying did his strength have to be? Thus, he only stared at the man. He saw the man using his hand as a knife to cut the tentacle on his ankle very fast, as if that was the most terrifying thing in the world, making for a very beaten picture. In fact, this was indeed the case, as this was Hysteria's tentacle. Although Ling Han successfully escaped from the void in time, one of Hysteria's tentacles had still managed to wrap around his ankle, and he had brought it out with him. Fortunately, the void closed in time, and the tentacle was cut off like it was severed by a switchblade. Before Ling Han could heave a sigh of relief, an incomparably evil intent rushed into his mind. At the same time, images appeared in his mind, but they didn't come from this intent. Instead, they came from the depths of his memories. What? He still had such a memory? Ling Han was shocked. Could it be that this was the awakening Meng Dong was talking about? Why was it related to Hysteria again? Images flashed through Ling Han's mind. He saw a strange creature that was indescribably huge, and its entire body was covered in tentacles. It was clinging onto a dimension, as if it was trying hard to squeeze into it, but was unable to. From this comparison, one could tell that it was actually about the size of a dimension, or even larger. It was too terrifying. What kind of creature could grow to such an extent? A name suddenly surfaced in Ling Han's mind: Hysteria. It could only be Hysteria. It manifested as a dimension and devoured everything. Could it be that this was the real scene of it confronting the flaming frost realm? Ling Han was greatly shaken. He did not know why he would have such a memory, and it just so happened that it was the power of Hysteria that stimulated this memory. Hysteria could always find him in the void and attack him quickly. Could it be related to this? There was more. Ling Han was suddenly startled. Previously, although Hysteria had come aggressively and even attacked him, it clearly had no intention of killing him. It was as if it just wanted to stimulate this memory buried in his body. Ling Han felt like he was about to go crazy. What did Hysteria mean? Had it been trying to snipe him several times just to let him see some kind of memory? No, there was also an indescribably evil intent that seemed to be awakening some kind of suppressed power in his body. Boom. Images kept flashing in his mind. That huge living being was constantly confronting some dimension, and in that dimension, there were countless elites embroiled in resistance against the invasion of this huge living being. These were all heavenly venerates. Ling Han came to a realization. This was definitely a battle between Hysteria and the elites of the Flaming Frost realm. The scene continued to flash, and Hysteria was still unable to conquer this dimension. Thus, its body trembled, and hundreds of light spots surged out of its body and traversed the void. At this moment, the scene changed, following these light spots. Some light spots encountered the energy storm in the void, and were quickly annihilated, but some light spots passed through the void and appeared in other dimensions. The image followed closely behind one of the specks of light and entered a dimension. It instantly gave Ling Han a strong sense of familiarity. The celestial realm. The speck of light didn't stop. It passed through the celestial realm, entered the ancient realm, and then entered a small world from the ancient realm. Shio. It entered the body of a person there. It was a woman. She had a big belly, but her clothes were ragged. It was obvious at first glance that she was extremely poor. More than a month later, she gave birth to a boy, but she died in childbirth. The boy was adopted, but he was soon living on the streets, engaged in petty theft. However, by chance, he became the disciple of a cultivation sect and embarked on a different path of life. Later on, this boy actually discovered that he had astonishing natural talent in alchemy, so he began to learn alchemy. Ling Han's jaw dropped involuntarily because this was his previous life. Soon, he saw how he was bullied by the heavenly phoenix divine maiden and searched for ancient sites everywhere in an attempt to turn the tables on her. In the end, he was killed by a tremor from the Black Tower, but his soul was preserved by the Black Tower. It was only after 10,000 years had passed that he had been sent into his current body and replaced the original host. During this process, the speck of light didn't perish, but underwent subtle changes. Peng! Ling Han's body shook, and he suddenly woke up. The images in his mind all disappeared, and the thousands of powers of dimension in his body erupted at the same time, forcefully obliterating the evil intent that Hysteria had sent into his mind. Wang, his mind lit up, and a seal appeared, instantly suppressing the other heavenly venerable seals until they paled in comparison. This was actually a first-grade seal. Ling Han was completely stupefied. For a moment, his mind was filled with a myriad of thoughts, and he felt that his heart was in a chaotic mess. There was too much information. He forced himself to calm down, and began to organize all the information into logical sequence. If the scene he saw was real, and not something Hysteria had deliberately fabricated to deceive him, then he really was inextricably linked to Hysteria. Based on what he saw, he had a guess. More than an epoch ago, Hysteria had not been able to conquer the flaming frost realm and crack this tough nut even after a long time. Thus, it had come up with a plan, shooting out hundreds of bright spots from its body. This was very likely similar to Seed of Life, an inheritance, or something of the sort. In short, some of these spots of light were destroyed in the void, while others went to various dimensions. As for Ling Han, he was the one chosen by the spot of light. Logically speaking, he should have obtained some kind of inheritance, but for some reason, this spot of light had hibernated instead. It was only when Hysteria came into direct contact with him just now that all these hidden images reappeared, allowing him to see this piece of history. This should be an inheritance because he had obtained a first-grade heavenly venerable seal. Considering that Meng Dong kept saying that Ling Han had yet to awaken, and even called him his little brother, he should also be someone Hysteria had chosen. What was the purpose? It was impossible for Hysteria to specially bestow gifts on them. From the very beginning, there was only one goal, and that was to destroy the Genesis world and devour it. Therefore, the mission of these chosen people should be to destroy the flaming frost realm and weaken its power so that it could be devoured. This deduction should be very reasonable, but the problem here was that Ling Han was not stupid. Why would he help Hysteria? Chapter 2883, 2883 Part of the Truth. Chapter 2883, 2883 Part of the Truth. 2883 Part of the Truth. Ling Han didn't think that he had to work for Hysteria just because the latter had given him a first-grade heavenly venerable seal. This was too foolish. He wasn't that stupid, and Hysteria shouldn't be that naive, either. Hang on. He suddenly recalled that an evil consciousness had entered his mind previously, but before it could do anything, it was obliterated by the powers of dimension surging in his body. Could it be that, under normal circumstances, this consciousness should have affected him, causing him to defect and become a traitor to join Hysteria's side? This was very likely. It very logically explained his prior conclusion. However, there was another problem. Hysteria would never do something that it was not confident in, so how had he managed to resist this consciousness? Hysteria's strength had surpassed the 7th tier. Was its consciousness so easily obliterated? Ling Han knew that he was very impressive. He had cultivated tens of thousands of powers of dimension, and he himself was equivalent to a small Genesis world. However, it was still a small Genesis world, after all. He had not even been able to defeat Shin Chihu, so what right did he have to be so strong as to obliterate Hysteria's consciousness? The more he realized, the more confused Ling Han became. He had solved some of the mysteries. For example, why did Meng Dong think that he was one of his group? Why did he keep calling him little brother? In a sense, they were indeed the same group. Why did Hysteria always find him so easily in the void? It was because the spot of light in his body was like a bright light in the darkness. It was too obvious to Hysteria, these spots of light were just a part of it. So annoying, so annoying. Ling Han opened his eyes. He was so frustrated that he wanted to beat someone up. Then, he saw Yang Zhouling standing in front of him. "Greetings, my lord." Yang Zhouling's heart skipped a beat. He hurriedly cupped his fists and bowed. Although he was grumbling mentally, because Ling Han had given him a fright, and even the celestial tool that he had almost forged successfully was gone, Ling Han's strength was clearly above his. To speak of nothing else, just the might he had exuded after opening his eyes just now had almost scared him out of his wits. It should be known that he was a celestial king, and was already standing at the same level as the regulations. If he was already so frightened, it could be seen how terrifying Ling Han was. Ling Han merely glanced at him, and immediately understood the entire sequence of events. He had just not paid attention, but that didn't mean that he didn't know. It was merely hidden in his memories, and now that he had dug it out, he understood. He nodded. With a flip of his hand, a piece of divine metal appeared. He shaped it casually, and this piece of divine metal quickly turned into the shape of a sword. Then, he threw it at Yang Zhouling. "I'll compensate for your sword." Yang Zhouling accepted the sword numbly. His mouth was about to split open from shock. This was divine metal, the sturdiest thing in the world. Ninth Heaven celestial kings could indeed break the divine metal, but it would definitely not be as easy as how Ling Han had easily and casually shaped it like it was clay. Such power surpassed the level of celestial king tier. Yang Zhouling fell to his knees with a thud, and said respectfully, "Greetings, senior. I am Yang Zhouling." Ling Han waved his hand dismissively, and said, "Go, this place is very dangerous. If you continue to stay here, I'm afraid your life will be in danger." "Yes." Yang Zhouling hurriedly left with the divine sword in his hands. This model had already been forged. Next, he only needed to nurture it with his own martial intent, and it would become a celestial tool. Ling Han stood still. He wasn't trying to scare Yang Zhouling, but if a great battle were to break out later, a mere First Heaven celestial king wouldn't even be worthy of being considered cannon fodder. A moment later, the void split open, and a person walked out. "Meng Dong. Little brother, now you know who you are, right?" he said with a smile. Ling Han's expression remained unchanged. He was not surprised by Meng Dong's appearance. Meng Dong was one of Hysteria's men, and he had awakened his memories. It was only natural that Meng Dong would come and recruit him. Ling Han raised his hand. Wang, a seal lit up, suppressing heaven and earth until they paled in color. Endless lightning immediately struck toward him. This was the first-grade heavenly venerable seal that he had just obtained. It was very strange. He didn't need to comprehend this seal, he had mastered it as soon as it appeared. It was as if he had learned it long ago, but he had forgotten and left it in some hidden corner. When Meng Dong saw this, he immediately laughed out loud. "Little brother, you've finally returned." Ling Han smiled faintly, and said, "I have some problems with my body, and some of my memories are not very clear." Meng Dong nodded. "You are indeed different from the others. Once we advance to the heavenly venerable tier, we will automatically awaken, but you had yet to awaken even after reaching the second tier. It was our Lord who exerted force and forcibly stimulated your dormant memories." As expected. Although Ling Han already had a guess, hearing Meng Dong say it himself still shook his heart. However, there was still no change in his expression. He still had this bit of self-control. Our Lord. It seemed that Meng Dong was completely on Hysteria's side. Ling Han deliberately looked distressed. My mind is a mess now. It's filled with confusion. Little brother, you have to know that we are all a part of the Lord. In the future, we will all return to our Lord and become the rulers of the entire Genesis world. Meng Dong's face revealed a fanatical expression. Little brother, if it wasn't for the power of our Lord in your body, how could you be so freakish and become such a powerful heavenly venerate? If it wasn't for our Lord, how could you have the ability to devour life essence and transform it into your own cultivation level? Everything we have is bestowed by our Lord, so you must firmly believe in it, and not let your thoughts run wild. Ling Han's heart stirred. Back then, he had been chosen by the Black Tower. Was it also because he had the power of hysteria in his body? A trace of confusion flashed in his heart. Could it be that it was all because of hysteria that he had managed to reach this level? Were all his efforts meaningless? No. Ling Han immediately thought to himself. Whether it was the power of hysteria or the Black Tower, they might indeed be of use to him on his path of growth, but the one who truly decided his fate was still himself. Ling Han said, "What should we do now?" Cultivate diligently. Once we advance to the 6th tier, we can begin to take action. Meng Dong revealed an intense killing intent. Ling Han's heart trembled. If others said that they wanted to reach the 6th tier, that might just be an extravagant hope. However, Meng Dong and the others all had a trace of hysteria's power in their bodies, so advancing to the 6th tier was definitely not difficult. It had to be known that hysteria was capable of creation in the void, and the 6th tiers it created could form an army, so it was definitely not impossible to help Meng Dong and the others reach 6th tier. At that time, Lin Luo and the other 7th tier elites would be restricted by the main body of hysteria. Behind the front lines, hundreds of 6th tier elites would display their might at the same time. How could the Flaming Frost realm manage to stop them? When all the living beings in the Flaming Frost realm died out, the power of heaven and earth would decline to the extreme, and hysteria would be able to directly devour the Flaming Frost realm. There would be no need to care about those 7th tiers at all. Moreover, now that the realm battlefield had been sealed, there were no more external threats, and only internal strife remained. Just look at how many heavenly venerates died a while ago. By the time Meng Dong and the others acted, how many 6th tiers could there be left in the Flaming Frost realm? The more Ling Han thought about it, the more apprehensive he became. Could it be that all of this was hysteria's scheme? It sealed off the realm battlefield so that there were signs of peace in the world, which caused the heavenly venerates to start fighting among themselves, while the power hysteria had laid in ambush was continuously growing. At that time, if it suddenly launched an attack, it could instantly destroy the Flaming Frost realm. Hehe, when can I meet my other brothers and sisters? Ling Han asked. If he could grasp the identities of all these people, then he could ask Zhu Heng, Chu Hao, and the others to take action and quell this chaos in advance. Meng Dong laughed. Little brother, don't be anxious. When the time comes, I'll naturally let you meet everyone. Fuck, this guy was quite vigilant, and still refused to trust Ling Han fully. Ling Han didn't say anything else. As the saying went, haste makes waste. He couldn't alert the enemy. Chapter 2884, 2884 Decision. Chapter 2884, 2884 Decision. 2884 Decision. Meng Dong gave Ling Han another speech, mostly to try and calm his emotions. After all, Ling Han had suddenly found out that he belonged to hysteria's side. How could he recover so quickly? After a while, Meng Dong said, "Little brother, let's keep in touch in the future. I am very excited to be working with you." For a moment, Ling Han considered the possibility of taking Meng Dong down on the spot and forcing his secret out of him. However, after some consideration, he decided to give up on that idea. He wasn't sure if hysteria had any more tricks up its sleeve. What if Meng Dong's mind were to explode directly under duress? He would then be losing a very valuable source of information. All right. Let's keep in touch. Ling Han nodded. Suddenly, he remembered something and came to a halt. Was it our Lord's plan to lead us to that lost dimension? Meng Dong had a puzzled look. I'm not too sure about that, either. Logically, that shouldn't be the case. While it's true that the current situation would lead to the deaths of a lot of heavenly venerates, there are simply too many resources lying there, which is more than enough to give the surviving ones a huge boost in strength. I'll be able to get clear answers from our Lord once I get in touch with him. Well then, I'm going. Opening the void, Meng Dong naturally headed towards the lost dimension. There were simply too many precious materials there. Even a 6th tier would see it as a treasured land. Ling Han was deep in thought. Unknown to him, there seemed to be several different forces vying for superiority. Hysteria was undoubtedly at the top. Its main body was in the midst of suppressing the flaming frost realm, but it had plenty of tricks up its sleeve. If it was allowed to carry on undeterred, it just might devour the Genesis world one day. However, with the appearance of a lost primitive dimension, a number of great herbs and heavenly venerable seals that shouldn't belong in this world emerged. They would cause a heavenly venerate to quickly increase in strength, and there was a good chance that a new 7th tier would be born in the near future. This was definitely not an outcome Hysteria wanted. How did that lost primitive dimension get destroyed in the first place? Moreover, it was a dimension overlapping another dimension. Theoretically, this wasn't possible. What sort of power was capable of surpassing the 7th tier and doing such a thing? Ling Han stood for a long time. He had gathered a lot of information in a single day, and he needed time to properly analyze it. After 10 days, he tore a rip into the void, and continued his journey. He had an unshakable faith. No matter what Hysteria had done to him in the past, he was still the same person as before, and would not live his life for anyone else's sake. In his heart, his family and friends were more important than anything else. He was definitely going to protect the Genesis world, and would not let Hysteria have its way. This time around, he didn't have to worry about Hysteria finding him as he traveled the void. Firstly, Hysteria assumed that it had no more reason to seek him out, because he had been awakened. Secondly, Ling Han had destroyed the mark that Hysteria had left. Without a lighthouse, how was Hysteria going to find him in the vastness of the void? Half a year had passed, and Ling Han finally found the lost dimension. He descended into the dimension. This was the outermost dimension, and Ling Han did not stop at all. He passed through the ground layer, and headed towards the dimension below. After passing through the second layer, he returned to base and regrouped with Juheng and the rest. He then told everyone everything about his body and his relation to Hysteria. He didn't hide a single thing, because he held no guilt. The revelation left Juheng and the rest in shock. They never would have thought Hysteria would have such a play. Ling Han, this is a grave matter. Please allow me to personally search your spirit, said Juheng. It wasn't because he didn't trust Ling Han, but Hysteria's methods were simply too cunning. No one knew if it had placed some sort of trap just waiting to be set off in the future in Ling Han's mind so that Ling Han would fall under its control. Ling Han agreed. He also wanted to know if he had been able to thoroughly remove all possible threats. Juheng placed his palm on Ling Han's head and inserted his divine sense. He gave the latter a thorough check, and he retracted his hand after a while. How is it? Both Lin Xiaoyang and Chu Hao asked. Juheng had a curious look on his face. This brat has limitless powers of dimension inside of him. It was like a giant millstone. My divine sense can't get inside at all, and was quickly ground to nothing. Is it really so amazing to progress on this path? Lin Xiaoyang asked in surprise. Seeing the puzzled look on Ling Han's face, he continued, truth be told, my father also once had a similar theory of compressing the powers of dimension from the entire Genesis world. However, this wasn't something that could be put into practice. Even a pseudo-heavenly venerate didn't have that kind of capacity. The power of 1,000 dimensions was the limit, and even then, this was nothing but a static force. One would not be able to go any further once they reached this limit. Hence, my father and his peers came up with another solution, and that was to imbue a small dimension inside of themselves before reaching the heavenly venerable tier. That way, the dimension's strength would grow along with one's own power. In the early stage, This would not even compare to a heavenly venerate with the strength of a few hundred dimensions. However, there was an endless potential for growth. Once you reached the 6th tier, this method would then prove to be the better solution. Yolian and Shin Chihu are prime examples of this. It was no wonder they only took a few million years to reach the 4th tier. They didn't have to gather strength from one dimension at a time. Of course they'd be faster. However, you somehow managed to take a different path altogether, and more or less merged both methods into one. If you were to train this to its full potential. Hiss. Zhu Heng and the other two gasped at the same time. How strong would Ling Han be then? According to my estimation, Ling Han's potential for development is limitless. Perhaps he can leap out of the 7th tier and stand at the same height as Hysteria, or even surpass it, Chu Hao said. Lin Xiaoyang also nodded. Thus, Ling Han will definitely not be controlled by Hysteria. It will definitely not allow any person who can threaten its existence to grow. Zhu Heng looked at Ling Han. Something shocking must have happened to you, causing the control of Hysteria to fail. It also allowed you to accommodate the powers of dimension of the entire Genesis world, turning you into another Genesis world with endless potential for development. The three of them were certain that Ling Han's situation was too unique, and definitely not something Hysteria could control. The problem now is to find Meng Dong and the others and eliminate them in advance. Otherwise, when they reach 6th tier, it will really be difficult to deal with them, Lin Xiaoyang said solemnly. However, we only know one Meng Dong and a Lu Xia now. If we act rashly, it's very likely that we'll alert the enemy and let the others completely hide their identities. They definitely won't make trouble unless they're at the 6th tier. Therefore, this matter still has to fall on Ling Han's shoulders. We will investigate the surviving dregs of Hysteria, and then announce it to the world. Then, we will attack together and eliminate these remnants. Ling Han nodded. I'll do my best. He took his leave. First, he boosted the devouring metal in his hand to the highest level. Then, he refined it into a supreme precious tool that was completely inclined to defense. Even the devouring metal had its limitations. The martial intent it could be branded with was limited, so it was good at attack, but not good at defense. After all, it was only a tool. This was a completely defensive supreme precious tool. Coupled with the toughness of the devouring metal, its defensive ability was extremely strong. Ling Han returned to the first dimensional layer, and moved everyone in the celestial guest residence over. From now on, this would be the new celestial guest residence. Then, he called the Empress and Hunyo over, and continued to explore for veins of ore. He had to reach 3rd tier as soon as possible. Otherwise, he really wouldn't feel safe in this chaotic world. Even Shin Chihu could make him flee in a sorry state. If Shin Chihu were to hear this, he would definitely fly into a rage. He was the greatest prodigy of all eternity, not just some nobody. After so many years, almost all the veins of ore in this dimension had actually been explored, so Ling Han headed towards the land's heart. Perhaps there was another dimension below. Chapter 2885, 2885 Primitive Stone Slab. Chapter 2885, 2885 Primitive Stone Slab. 2885 Primitive Stone Slab. Since an overlapped dimension had already appeared, why couldn't there be another? Ling Han and the others headed underground. It was said that some forces had gone deep underground to see if there was a 3rd dimension. As for whether there was one or not, it was currently an absolute secret, and could not possibly be leaked. The ground structure here was actually very solid. The soil had been compressed, and the same piece of soil was at least 10 times heavier than in the Flaming Frost dimension. However, due to the lack of the support of the power of dimension, this solid layer of soil couldn't withstand a single blow. Ayo! Hunyo suddenly let out a cry of pain. Nyo's head, it's going to be split in half. Ling Han turned around and asked, what's going on? Nyo got hit. Hunyo rubbed her head, where a bump had abruptly appeared on her forehead. Ling Han hurriedly walked back, and saw that there was actually a huge stone slab in Hunyo's path. The little girl had crashed into it, and not only did it forcefully stop her, but it also caused a bump on her forehead. However, this was extremely unbelievable. Hunyo was a 4th tier, and her physique had been tempered by 3 types of fundamental powers. How tough did her physique have to be? Yet, it was actually stopped by a stone slab, and a bump appeared on her head. Linghan looked at the stone slab. It had already shattered. After all, it had been rammed by a 4th tier. Other than the devouring metal at great accomplishment level, what other material in the world could be so hard? Fortunately, Hunyo had only gotten a little scrape, and was not seriously injured. Hence, Linghan focused on studying this stone slab, and discovered that this thing was actually the stone material used to construct the city walls of the defenses in the realm battlefield. This stone material was incomparably sturdy, but it couldn't be made into any precious tool, because it didn't have any spirituality. There are words on it. The Empress also walked over. Linghan nodded. There were indeed many words engraved densely on it, but they were completely different from any of the existing words, and could not be read. Oh, Nyo's head hurts so much. Linghan, quickly blow on it for Nyo, Hunyo said, acting spoiled. All Linghan could do was hold the little girl in his arms. As he rubbed her small head, he continued to study this stone slab. I wonder what's written here, the Empress said. Let's get Wally here and ask him. Linghan thought for a moment. Although Wally might not recognize it, he was good at deduction. As long as there were enough words, he might be able to decipher it. He thought about it again. Forget it. I'll go look for him. You and Hunyo go on first. I'll leave a trace of power on you. It can be a light that will guide me back here, Linghan said. The Empress nodded, pulled Hunyo along, and left first. No, Nyo wants to be with Linghan. Hunyo struggled, but was unable to shake off the Empress, and could only call out in vain. Linghan put away the stone slab and took a step forward. He was already out of the void, and then tore open space to return to the void. However, he was already in a completely different position now the powers of dimension in his body were channeled. He searched for the location of the flaming frost realm, and then spread out his body, shuttling through the void like lightning. It took him more than 20 years to return to the flaming frost realm. Then, he found Wally at the world's paramount martial academy. This guy had stayed in the martial academy all this while, and had no plans on leaving. Come, analyze it for me and tell me what the words on it mean. Linghan handed the stone slab to Wally. It wasn't easy for him to find written records in that lost land. Perhaps he could uncover the secrets of that place. 100 pieces of divine metal, Wally said, after taking a look. Yi, why did you increase the price? Linghan asked with a smile. He naturally didn't care about 100 pieces of divine metal anymore, but teasing Wally was very fun. Wally looked at Linghan seriously. This is from a completely different civilization. It's extremely difficult for me to crack it. Linghan laughed loudly, and threw out several hundred pieces of divine metal with a wave of his hand. This was the common currency for stone gambling, so he naturally had plenty on him. Wally didn't ask him why he gave more. In any case, Linghan could give more, but he couldn't give less. How long will it take? Linghan asked. A few years now, Wally said. Linghan was curious. Then what about in the past? Probably a few hundred years, he said. It wasn't very long, either. Linghan nodded, and then sat cross-legged at the side, waiting quietly. He had just sorted out his thoughts. He was actually involved with hysteria. This wasn't something that could be let go so easily. The two of them fell silent. One was studying the words on the stone slab, while the other was thinking about his own matters. Time passed quickly. In the blink of an eye, 7 years had passed. It's done, Wally suddenly said. Linghan snapped out of his deep meditation, and opened his eyes. Tell me about it. There's a major event recorded on it. The general idea is that an extremely powerful creature appeared and threatened their world, as well as countless similar worlds. Therefore, the elites of their world joined forces with the elites of other worlds to resist this creature, Wally said. Linghan was stunned. Was this referring to hysteria? Be more specific, he said. What's the name of this powerful creature? Wally shook his head. I can't translate this, because the name itself is meaningless. That was indeed the case. Ling Han nodded slowly, organizing his thoughts in his mind. Could the powerful living being mentioned on the stone slab be Hysteria? This was too consistent with Hysteria's description. However, the time didn't match. Hysteria didn't appear when the Genesis world was born. Instead, after the Genesis world developed to a certain stage, it was a cultivator from a certain dimension that suddenly had an idea and created such a monster. From then on, this monster gradually ran out of control. It devoured all the cultivators, living beings, and even the dimension itself, replacing them. From then on, the prelude to the realm war began. At that time, Lin Luo and the others should have already become seventh tiers. If it was said that two dimensions overlapped and were lost in the void together, and they knew nothing about it, how could this be possible? But if it had not been for Hysteria, where would such a terrifying guy have gone? He couldn't have disappeared into thin air, right? And there was that dead seventh tier as well. He should have been undying and indestructible. The overlapping of two dimensions could only be done with the combined efforts of at least several hundred seventh tiers, which was even more inconceivable. Ling Han sighed. It looked like he was still far from unraveling all the mysteries. Will you go to that dimension in the void to take a look? Suppressing such emotions, he asked Wally. No, Wally refused immediately without a second thought. All right then. Then I will come and visit you again in the future when I have the time. Wally scoffed. You will only come when you need something. Ling Han laughed loudly. You're right. He directly tore open space and entered into the void. Then, with the sliver of powers of dimension he had left on the Empress as a beacon, he traversed the void. This naturally took him another several decades before he again returned to that lost primitive dimension. Chapter 2886, 2886 Fei by Pig. Chapter 2886, 2886 Fei by Pig. 2886 Fei by Pig. Ling Han realized that he was really busy. How many times had he come here already? He shook his head and began to pass through the earth. He first arrived at the second dimension, and then headed further underground. This was because the Empress had the power of dimension that he had left behind, and it could act as his guiding light. The Empress was clearly still further underground. Could there really be a third dimension down there? Although Ling Han had already guessed this, when this scenario really happened, he still found it somewhat unbelievable. Overlapping two dimensions already required several hundred seventh tiers to act simultaneously. As for three, just how powerful would they need to be? Ling Han didn't dare to think about it. At the very least, even if all the elites present were to join forces, they wouldn't be able to do it. Even Hysteria probably wouldn't be able to do it. Otherwise, if it could already overlap dimensions, how could it not be able to conquer the flaming frost realm? Ling Han sped up, and he continued to dive downwards. The power of the heavenly venerable tier surged, and all obstacles were unable to withstand a single blow from him, as if they were made from paper. He traveled like this for about 10 days. Shio. He broke through the last layer of the earth, and he appeared in a new world. A tall mountain rose hundreds of thousands of meters high, and a crevasse was hundreds of thousands of meters deep. In the past, this had clearly been a sea, but now the seawater had evaporated, leaving behind only a huge sinkhole. As expected, there was a third dimension here. Ling Han sensed that this should also have been a high-level dimension in the past, but it was already dead now, and could only be identified based on the strength of the 6 fundamental powers. Of course, Ling Han could only sense one type of fundamental power now. He quickly probed which direction he should head in, then spread out his body again, and sped forward. After a few more days, a mountain range appeared in front of him, and the Empress was within these mountains. Shio. Ling Han's figure descended, and he quickly found the Empress and Hu Niu. Ling Han. Hu Niu jumped over first and hugged him. You're too bad. Niu's head is about to burst open, but you don't care at all. Niu is going to die of sadness. This little girl. Ling Han didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He hugged the little girl and said, all right, aren't I back now? Then Niu wants you to kiss Niu 100 times no, 1,000 times. Hunyao bargained, her big eyes blinking. Ling Han was slightly embarrassed. It was not only the Empress and Hunyao here, but also a large group of other people as well. It was fine if they kissed a few times, but kissing 100 or 1,000 times was a little awkward. "We'll kiss when we get home," he said to Hunyao. Only then did Hunyao nod, beaming with joy. Sometimes, she was quite easy to pacify. "What's the situation?" he asked the Empress. "A huge ore deposit has been discovered here. After all these years of mining, there isn't much left, but the essence should still be here. Therefore, no one can mine it now. Everyone has an eye on it, and we're going to have a fight over it," the Empress said. Ling Han nodded, and asked, "Who are the elites there?" "There are quite a few 4th tiers, and even a few 5th tiers, the Empress said solemnly. Ling Han also frowned. He could deal with 4th tiers, but when it came to 5th tiers, he wouldn't be able to deal with them even if he used the 9th grade combination seals. Unless. With a sudden flip of her hand, the Empress took out several great herbs. "Over the years, we've also unearthed quite a few great herbs, so we've left some for you. Ling Han, after you eat them, will you be able to reach the 3rd tier?" Hunyao asked. Ling Han was originally at the peak stage of the 2nd tier, and he had already strengthened his foundations previously. When pursued by Xin Chihu, he had even refined his power to an incomparably pure level. As long as he advanced his cultivation level a little further, he would be able to break through. Perhaps it was just a matter of a few more great herbs. Ling Han nodded, and said, "I'll try." If he advanced into the 3rd tier, he would have the ability to fight against even 5th tiers. Of course, whether he could suppress them or not was another matter. After all, having 5th tier battle prowess and crushing 5th tiers were two completely different matters. Ye, Celestial Maidens, this is, just as Ling Han was about to enter the new celestial guest residence, he saw an imposing-looking man walk over with large strides. There was a gentle smile on his face, but it did not conceal the pride in the depths of his eyes. Ling Han looked at the Empress, and asked, "Trouble? Just go into seclusion. I'll take care of it," the Empress said indifferently, appearing to be completely unconcerned. Ling Han nodded, and he instantly entered the celestial guest residence with a flash. "Why Yaya, why don't you ask Nyo? Nyo can take care of it too." Hunyao jumped around, appearing extremely displeased. Only then did the Empress turn to look at the man. "It has nothing to do with you." The man's smile didn't diminish, and he showed a caring expression. "I'm just worried that the 2 celestial maidens will be deceived by others. Fei Bai Pig, you're so annoying." Hunyao made a face at him. "Celestial maiden who, my name is Fei Baizhu," the man corrected Hunyao, but there was a smile on his face. If Hunyao was only beautiful, then as a dignified 4th tier, he would not take her seriously at all. However, Hunyao's beauty was pure, natural, and not pretentious at all. This was incomparably rare. Just look, what heavenly venerate would make faces? She was the only one who looked fresh and refined. And in the case of the Empress, besides being beautiful, she was also proud to the core. This was also her natural personality, which he liked. "It's still easier to remember Fei Bai Pig," Hunyao muttered, and then put her hands at her waist. "Yi, didn't I tell you to get lost? Why are you still standing here? Do you want to snatch Nyo's meat?" Her face was full of suspicion and vigilance, causing Fei Baizhu not to know whether to laugh or cry. He was a dignified 4th tier. Did he have to snatch food from others? "Don't worry, Celestial Maiden who. I won't snatch it from you," he explained. "You won't snatch it, but you still want to eat it, right?" Hunyao's ability to reason was completely different from others. She couldn't help but turn her body to the side to guard the food in her hand, as if a piece would be missing if someone just looked at it. The Empress was impatient. "Fei Baizhu, you're not welcome here. I've already said this many times." Fei Baizhu's gaze turned cold. Initially, he didn't mind taking things slowly. After all, Hunyao and the Empress were a 4th tier and 3rd tier. Being able to cultivate to such a height, and to be as beautiful as a fairy, each with their own unique characteristics, they naturally made his heart palpitate. Spending some time courting them would also be worth it. Only such a Tao partner was worthy of accompanying him in his long life. Otherwise, he would get sick of her sooner or later. However, Ling Han's appearance caused him to develop a strong sense of danger. If he were to slowly court them, then it might all be for naught. All right then. Please be careful, celestial maidens. After all, the people here are complicated. If you encounter any danger, feel free to come to my base. I'll definitely do my best to help. He didn't continue to pester them. Instead, a warm smile appeared on his face. He turned around and left. What do you think he means by that? Hunyo asked the Empress. Who cares what kind of schemes he's up to? The Empress didn't care. She sat down cross-legged and closed her eyes to rest. Arrogant woman, Hunyo grumbled, and also sat down. Chapter 2887, 2887 Arrival of Enemies. Chapter 2887, 2887 Arrival of Enemies. 2887 Arrival of Enemies. There were many people in the mountains, but no one spoke. The atmosphere seemed rather oppressive. This was because there was a high chance that a huge battle would break out at any moment, and a major reshuffling of cards would occur. Many people would be eliminated in the battle, losing the right to touch this last vein of ore. Sure enough, a few days later, the purge began, and elites led teams to chase off the lone elites. After sweeping away these small fries, the remaining major factions would naturally fight to determine the ownership of the final and most precious vein of ore. It was still relatively quiet where the Empress and Hunyo were, but after half a month, there were still people who came over. Celestial maidens, are you willing to join our Xuanwu alliance? 4 people walked over together. 2 of them were 4th tiers, while the other 2 were 3rd tiers. This was an extremely powerful group. Not interested, the Empress rejected him coldly without even opening her eyes. Then we have no choice but to ask the 2 of you to leave, a 4th tier stated calmly. Does this place belong to you? What right do you have to chase me away? Hunyo immediately jumped up. It's fine if you want to stay, but the 2 of you will have to be strong enough, the 4th tier said. Don't waste words on them, just chase them away, another 4th tier said. All right. The first 4th tier nodded. He had a head full of grey hair, but his face was as young as a youth in his late teens. It was very strange. He and the other red-robed 4th tier attacked at the same time, launching an attack at Hunyo, while the other 2 3rd tiers joined forces to attack the Empress. 2 4th tiers versus 1 4th tier, 2 3rd tiers versus 1 3rd tier, both sides were a 2-on-1 battle. It was obvious that they had already made prior arrangements, and it was definite that 2 of them would be dealing with 1 each. Ha ha ha, Nyo loves fighting the most. Hunyo laughed loudly. Her figure was incomparably agile, and she immediately charged towards the 2 4th tiers. The Empress, on the other hand, remained seated cross-legged. Only when the 2 3rd tiers arrived did she let out a soft exclamation and sent out a palm strike. Wang, a terrifying power surged, and a jade-like palm that was as large as the heavens appeared, pressing down on the 2 3rd tiers. Reality proved that someone like her, who had condensed a number of powers of dimension to break through to the 1st tier, would have a huge advantage in the early stage. However, because there was a limit to the powers of dimension, this advantage would also be continuously weakened as her cultivation level increased. But even so, she was still far stronger than her peers of the same cultivation level. Even if she did really reach the 7th tier one day, she could still maintain a considerable advantage. The Empress's current cultivation level was the early stage of the 3rd tier, but her battle prowess had directly soared to the peak stage of the 3rd tier. Hong, this palm of hers was too terrifying, enough to crush 99% of all 3rd tiers. Not good. The 2 3rd tiers both cried out in alarm. They were both in the late stage of the 3rd tier. Originally, they had the upper hand in terms of cultivation level, and now that it was a 2-on-1 fight, they should have a firm grasp of victory. However, they did not expect the Empress to actually be so freakish, which caused them to be completely unable to react in time. Wang, seals lit up on their bodies, and they both channeled heavenly venerable seals at the same time. Peng. They each launched an attack to meet the Empress's strike. Shock waves rippled out. The 2/3 tiers joined forces, and with the help of the heavenly venerable seals, they finally withstood the Empress's attack. Their expressions couldn't help but change. Although they had blocked this attack, the Empress had only done it casually, and hadn't used her full strength at all. If she had also channeled the heavenly venerable seals, how could they have withstood it? Not good. There was an unexpected variable for their plans. The Empress opened her eyes, her gaze filled with killing intent. She actually hadn't killed the enemy with a single strike. Her pride had already been stimulated. With a humph, her figure flashed, and she took the initiative to charge towards the 2/3 tiers. A heavenly venerable seal was channeled by her, adding a terrifying power to her attacks, and her divine might was incomparably terrifying. The 2/3 tiers didn't dare to take her assault head-on at all, and hurriedly retreated. If they took it head-on, they would probably be courting death. Lord Crimson Emperor. They pleaded for help from the red-robed 4th tier. Interesting. The red-robed 4th tier humphed lightly, then turned around, and sent a palm strike toward the Empress. Hong, the might of 4th tier was incomparably terrifying. Peng. The Empress's figure was forcefully stopped. One side had battle prowess of the peak of the 3rd tier, while the other was in the middle stage of the 4th tier. The disparity between them was too great. Ha 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 ha, shameless woman, do you want Nyo to help you? Nyo clapped her hands and laughed. She had never liked the Empress, so why would she take the initiative to help? The Empress didn't say a word, avoiding the red-robed 4th tier and focusing on those 2/3 tiers. Crimson Emperor, go and take down that 3rd tier. I'll handle things here, the white-haired 4th tier said. All right. The red-robed 4th tier nodded. With such a casual attack, even if he could take down a peak stage 3rd tier, he would still have to expend some effort. Shameless. Nyo shouted lightly, and intercepted the red-robed 4th tier. Little girl, you should take care of yourself first, the white-haired 4th tier said with a smile. He pressed down with his palm, forcing Nyo to turn back and defend. That was because he was also in the middle stage of the 4th tier, which was much stronger than Nyo. Nyo's angry now. Nyo cried out, abruptly channeling a heavenly venerable seal, and her battle prowess instantly soared. This was a heavenly venerable seal she had obtained from unearthing stones, and it increased her strength by more than 20 times. In this way, her might instantly soared, and she broke through the blockade of the white-haired 4th tier, and joined forces with the Empress. White hair, you can't even stop an early-stage 4th tier? The red-robed 4th tier looked at the white-haired 4th tier teasingly. The white-haired 4th tier humphed, and similarly channeled a heavenly venerable seal of his own, immediately raising his battle prowess. Boom. He had an advantage in terms of cultivation level, but his heavenly venerable seal was inferior to Nyo's, so their battle prowess was not much different. However, everyone knew that heavenly venerable seals could only release energy for 2 hours. At that time, Nyo's battle prowess would rapidly decrease, and she would no longer be a match for him. However, for now, Nyo was enough to restrain the 2/4 tiers, allowing the Empress to free herself and suppress the 2/3 tiers. The 2/3 tiers could only continuously dodge, relying on the 2/4 tiers to strike out from time to help them out of their dilemma. They were all incomparably ashamed and resentful. They had clearly come to suppress that 3rd tier, but now they had become a burden. Fortunately, the time that Nyo could display her might was limited. As long as they dragged it out for another 2 hours, she would be powerless to continue. 2 hours passed very quickly. Just as the red-robed man and the white-haired man were preparing to counter with all their might, Nyo channeled the 2nd seal, and there was not much decline to her battle prowess at all. What? This shocked the red-robed man and the white-haired man greatly. How could Nyo still use a high-level heavenly venerable seal? Although it was only a 7th grade heavenly venerable seal, because 8th grade heavenly venerable seals were already considered top-notch, 7th grade heavenly venerable seals were definitely far above average. One had to remember something here. Before these primitive dimensions were discovered, just how many heavenly venerable seals were there in the world? It was only now that there were more heavenly venerable seals, but they were basically only of the 9th grade. However, Nyo used 2 7th grade seals in a row. How could they not be shocked and envious? If it weren't for a certain someone having warned them in advance, they'd really want to kill Hu Niu and extract these 2 7th grade seals from her. Fine, they would just have to last another 2 hours. Chapter 2888, 2888 Summoning Help. Chapter 2888, 2888 Summoning Help. 2888 Summoning Help. However, 2 hours later, Hu Niu used a 3rd 7th grade seal. Over the years, how many raw stones had Ling Han and the others cut open? Although only a small portion of them revealed heavenly venerable seals, and most of them were handed over to Ling Han, the Empress and Hu Niu still received a few. How could this be? At a mountain peak very far away, Fei Baizhu frowned. According to his plan, Hu Niu and the Empress should be defeated very soon, and he would appear in time to save the 2 women. Although saving a damsel in distress was an old trick, it was a trick that never failed. But now, although the beauties were in danger, it seemed that they could solve it themselves. How could he then proceed to save them? Forget it, let's stick to the plan. With a leap, he appeared at the edge of the battle area. Crimson Emperor, White Demon, can you please give me some face and stop? He asked. The red-robed and white-haired duo stopped as instructed, but the Empress and Hu Niu didn't. One continued to attack the 2 3rd tiers, while the other continued to focus a wild offensive on the red-robed and white-robed duo. In this way, the 2 3rd tiers could only continue fleeing, and the red-robed and white-haired men also had to face Hu Niu, or else they would be equivalent to raising their heads to simply accept death. Fei Baizhu's expression was ugly. He actually couldn't persuade them. What would happen to his pride? Celestial maidens, this is all a misunderstanding, he said. Crimson Emperor and White Demon are both capable members of our alliance, and they are here on my father's orders to chase off all other uninvolved persons. As long as the 2 of you join our alliance, you will naturally not be subjected to such restrictions. Hu Niu giggled. Fei Bai Pig, you intentionally commanded these people to find trouble with us, and then you took the opportunity to save the damsel in distress, making us look at you in a different light and be grateful to you, right? What a pity, you didn't think that our power would surpass your imagination. Seeing Fei Baizhu's expression change slightly, she continued, this trick is too old-fashioned. It has long been seen through by the wise and mighty Niu. Fei Baizhu couldn't help but clench his fists, his heart fluctuating slightly. Young Master Fei, these 2 women have at least 7th grade heavenly venerable seals on them. It's extremely likely that they're even more important than the veins of ore here. I advise you to give up on those silly ideas and capture these 2 people to extract their heavenly venerable seals from them, the white-haired 4th tier said coldly. Although he addressed Fei Baizhu as young Master Fei, there was no respect in his tone. They were both in the 4th tier, and his cultivation level was slightly higher. He addressed Fei Baizhu as young Master Fei naturally because of Fei Baizhu's father. That father was a 5th tier elite, and even if 100 4th tier elites were added together, they might not be a match for him. That's right. We pursue the supreme heavenly Tao, so how can we be distracted by women, the red-robed 4th tier also said. Fei Baizhu's expression was ugly. He didn't want to give up on the Empress and Hu Niu, because, in his opinion, the path of cultivation was long, so if he had such peerless beauties accompanying him, he naturally wouldn't feel bored or frustrated. However, after hearing what the 2 of them said, would the 2 women still follow him? He was a decisive person as well, and immediately nodded. All right. He joined the fray, and the 3 4th tiers exerted their strength together. Hu Niu was instantly embroiled in a dilemma. Although Fei Baizhu was only an early-stage 4th tier, he had channeled a 7th grade seal, and his strength was not inferior to Hu Niu's. This became a 3-on-1 battle, giving Hu Niu immense pressure. Wah, shameless. 3 against 1. Hu Niu cried out loudly, but gritted her teeth and refused to retreat. It was easy for her to retreat, but what about the Empress? Although the 2 women fought frequently, they were both members of the Ling clan. How could they watch the other fall into enemy hands? Retreat, the Empress said. She approached Hu Niu. He, if we can let you 2 escape, Then we don't need to live anymore, the red-robed fourth tier said. He forcefully suppressed them, and another 2 hours passed. Hunyo finally didn't have a fourth 7th grade seal to channel, and her battle prowess plummeted. Shameless woman, what other ideas do you have? Hunyo shouted at the Empress. The Empress shrugged, indicating that there was nothing she could do, either. Then we can only call Ling Han out, Hunyo shouted loudly. Ling Han, quickly come and save me. You still want to call for help? The white-haired fourth tier sneered. At this time, no one can save you. Oh, what makes you so sure? Shio. With a flash, Ling Han had already appeared. Ling Han, Hunyo shouted happily. She didn't care what kind of time or place this was, and immediately jumped onto Ling Han, giving him a bear hug. Although Fei Baizhu had already given up on the two women, seeing Hunyo and Ling Han being so intimate, his expression still couldn't help but change. He snorted coldly, and said, just a puny 2nd tier. His tone was filled with disdain. White hair and red robe also laughed loudly. What utter nonsense. They had thought that some super elite would be called out, but it was actually just a 2nd tier. What could a 2nd tier do? Ling Han stared at Fei Baizhu. You dare to have designs on my wives? What are you? Before Fei Baizhu could finish speaking, Ling Han had already charged over, and threw a punch. This punch was so fast. Although Fei Baizhu was slightly shocked, he didn't care at all. So what if Ling Han was fast? He was only a 2nd tier. Fei Baizhu delivered a palm strike towards Ling Han. At this moment, he had already channeled a heavenly venerable seal, and his battle prowess was currently at its peak, reaching middle stage 4th tier, which could be considered to be incomparably terrifying. Pang! As the punch landed on him, Fei Baizhu's entire body trembled as he spat out a mist of blood. Young Master Fei. The white-haired man and the red-robed man were both shocked. Why was it that not only did Fei Baizhu not kill Ling Han with a single palm strike, he was even slightly injured? However, Fei Baizhu didn't answer them. He just stood there. The two were shocked. What was going on? However, Ling Han paid no more attention to Fei Baizhu, and strode towards the red-robed man and the white-haired man. There was a seal glowing on his body, and although there was only one, it exuded a domineering aura that suppressed all the heavenly Tao in the world. This was because this was a 1st-grade heavenly venerable seal. What kind of heavenly venerable seal is this? It's too terrifying. It seems to have surpassed everything. The red-robed man and the white-haired man cried out in surprise. They even forgot to be concerned about Fei Baizhu's current situation. Ling Han let out a long cry, and punched out. Boundless power surged, and the nearby mountain peaks collapsed one by one, while the sky trembled violently, collapsing in large patches. Only then did the red-robed man and the white-haired man become horrified. Previously, they were only shocked that Ling Han could stand against Fei Baizhu, but now that they were personally facing Ling Han, they finally understood what kind of pressure this was. They hurriedly released their strongest battle prowess, and went forth to meet Ling Han's attack. Peng! However, with only a single strike, they felt as if they had suffered a terrifying blow, and all the veins and bones in their bodies were instantly broken apart. They were shocked. A 2nd tier had dealt them such a heavy blow with just one punch, and they had completely lost any ability to continue fighting. Was he still human? Ling Han was astounded. They actually didn't die. In his opinion, these two people should have died with a single punch. Boom. In response to this, Fei Baizhu's body suddenly exploded, turning into an endless rain of blood. He had been killed by Ling Han in a single strike, and had only exploded at this moment. Logo. This is the end of part 1. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories,